Nathan Caldwell didn't look up when his assistant handed him the termination papers. He just signed them. 12 years of loyalty, and the man got 30 seconds and a check. Clean it up, Nathan said, already reaching for his phone. That was who he was. Efficient, cold, untouched by the wreckage he left behind. The lawyers called it decisive. The people who worked for him called it something else entirely, usually after they'd been escorted from the building. He had built an empire on that coldness. And standing outside Mercy General Hospital on a gray Tuesday morning, fresh from the biggest deal of his career, Nathan Caldwell believed that coldness had served him perfectly. Then he saw her, and everything he thought he knew about his own life stopped making sense. If this story already has your heart, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments below, and let's see just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The woman standing near the hospital entrance was thinner than he remembered. Her coat was dark gray, her hair pulled back without ceremony, and she was holding something wrapped in a pale blue blanket so carefully, with both arms, body slightly turned, like she was shielding whatever was inside from the wind, that Nathan almost didn't recognize her at first. Almost. Serena Hartwell, his ex-wife, the woman he hadn't spoken to in over a year, standing outside a Chicago hospital holding a newborn baby. Nathan's driver had already pulled the car around. Marcus was waiting, door open, expression professionally blank the way it always was. Nathan didn't move. He stood on the top step of the hospital entrance and watched Serena adjust the blanket around the infant, her eyes down, careful and deliberate. And something about the stillness of that moment, the way she wasn't looking around, wasn't searching for anyone, hit him like cold water. She already knew he was there. She looked up. Their eyes met, and Nathan felt something shift in his chest. Not the way it used to, back when seeing her had been the best part of his day. This was different. This was dread. Serena crossed the sidewalk toward him without hurrying. She walked the way she always had. Straight spine, no wasted movement. But her face was different. There was something in it he had never seen before. And Nathan Caldwell had spent enough time reading people across negotiating tables to know the difference between a woman who was nervous and a woman who had already made peace with something painful. She had made peace with this. "Nathan," she said. "Serena." His voice came out even. He had trained it to do that. "What are you doing here?" She stopped in front of him, 3 feet between them. The baby made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a breath catching, and Serena shifted her weight automatically, that instinctive adjustment that Nathan had seen mothers make 1,000 times without ever thinking about it. "I've been here for 4 days," she said. "I was going to call you. I kept deciding I would do it tomorrow." A pause. There weren't enough tomorrows. "What does that mean?" His eyes dropped to the bundle in her arms. "Whose baby is that?" Serena looked at him for a moment that lasted too long. "His name is Lucas," she said. "He's yours." What? Nathan had closed a $400 million deal that morning. He had sat across from 3 of the most aggressive real estate developers on the East Coast and walked away with everything he'd come for. He had done it in under 2 hours, which his lawyer called unprecedented, and his CFO called proof that Nathan Caldwell was simply built differently than other men. He stood on the steps of Mercy General, unable to speak. "That's not possible," he said. The words came out automatically, the way denial always does, before the brain has time to catch up with what the body already knows. "It's possible," Serena said. "You know it is." He did the math without wanting to. 14 months ago, before the divorce was finalized, there had been one night, one conversation that had turned into something else, something neither of them planned or discussed afterward. He had assumed it was grief, the last gasp of something that was already over. He had filed it away and not looked at it again. "You should have told me," he said. "I know." "Serena, I know, Nathan." Her voice didn't waver. "I made choices I have to answer for. I'm not here to argue about them." "Then why are you here?" She looked down at the baby. Something moved across her face. Not quite sadness, not quite love, but some complicated mixture of both that made Nathan's chest tighten in a way he didn't have language for. "Because I can't do this alone anymore," she said simply. "And because he deserves to know his father." She held the baby out. Nathan took a step back. Actual, physical retreat. Serena, take him. Her voice was very quiet. Just for a moment. Take him. He didn't know why he did it. He had no instinct for this. He had never been around infants, had actively avoided them at company events, had dismissed the entire category of human development as something that existed in a world separate from his own. But something in Serena's face, some combination of exhaustion and desperation, and something that looked dangerously close to a plea, made his arms open without his brain signing off on the decision. The baby was heavier than he expected, compact and warm and utterly indifferent to the chaos it had just detonated in the middle of Nathan Caldwell's carefully ordered life. The pale blue blanket smelled like hospital soap and something sweeter underneath. Lucas, the name was strange in Nathan's mind, something he had to say slowly to make it feel real, scrunched his face against the unfamiliar arms and made a small protesting sound. Nathan froze. "You won't break him," Serena said, and there, at the edge of her voice, was something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Hold him closer. He doesn't like space." Nathan adjusted his grip, awkwardly. The baby settled. He looked down at the face of his son for the first time. Lucas had Serena's mouth. Nathan could see that clearly even through the newborn squish of him. That particular set to the lips that had once, a very long time ago, made Nathan believe he was the luckiest man in any room. But the eyes, when they cracked open for just a second, pale and unfocused and searching for nothing in particular, those were darker, and the bone structure coming in beneath the soft infant flesh was something Nathan recognized from the one photograph he still kept of himself at 30. His lungs did something strange. He looked up. Serena was watching him with an expression that was careful and sad and terribly tired. "There are documents in the car," she said. "Paternity confirmation." "Everything you'll need." She paused. "I had the test done before he was born." "Before—" He stopped. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." "Serena." Something in his voice broke slightly, just at the edge. He caught it, pulled it back. "That is not an answer." "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She reached into the bag over her shoulder and produced a manila envelope, thick, the kind lawyers use, and set it on the hospital railing beside him with the practiced efficiency of someone who had rehearsed this moment many times. "Everything's in there," she said. "My contact information is on the inside cover. You can call your lawyers first if you want. I understand that." She adjusted the strap of her bag. "I just ask that you don't wait too long. He needs stability." "You're leaving," Nathan said. It wasn't a question. "I need to." She reached out and touched the edge of the blanket around Lucas. Just the edge. Brief. Like she was saying something she didn't have words for. "He's fed. He'll need to eat again in about 2 hours. The bag in the car has everything for a few days." Nathan stared at her. "You're leaving him with me right now? Today?" "I told you. I can't do this alone anymore." "Serena, I don't—" He stopped, shifted the baby in his arms. The movement woke Lucas slightly, and the infant's face crumpled toward a cry before settling again. Nathan held very still, like he was diffusing something. "I don't know how to do this." "I know," she said. "Neither did I." She looked at him one last time, and whatever was in that look, it was not anger, and it was not contempt, and it was definitely not love, or at least not any version of love Nathan knew how to hold. It was something more like grief that had finished being acute and turned into something you just carried. Then she turned and walked toward a waiting car at the far end of the block. "Serena." His voice was louder than he meant it to be. She didn't stop. "Serena, we are not done talking." She got in the car. The door closed. The car moved into traffic and was gone. Nathan stood on the steps of Mercy General Hospital, holding a newborn son he hadn't known existed 20 minutes ago. A thick manila envelope balanced on the railing beside him, and Marcus still waiting at the curb with the town car door open, his face carefully expressing nothing. Lucas made a small sound. Nathan looked down. "I don't know what that means," Nathan said to the baby. His voice came out rough. "You're going to have to be specific." Basset. The first night was a particular kind of disaster. Nathan Caldwell owned a 14,000-square-foot penthouse on the 53rd floor of a building he also owned. The kitchen had been designed by a Michelin-starred consultant. The master bedroom had a view of Lake Michigan that visiting CEOs had described on more than one occasion as spiritual. The place was immaculate and silent and perfectly tuned to the life of a single man who worked 18 hours a day and required nothing from his environment except efficiency. Lucas hated it immediately. The drive home had been tense in the way that drives home are when one occupant doesn't understand anything that's happening and the other occupant is having a slow-motion panic attack they're too proud to show. Nathan had held Lucas against his chest in the back seat, Marcus driving with unusual gentleness, and read the front page of the manila envelope 3 times without absorbing a word of it. The paternity results were on page 2. 99.97% probability. He'd looked at those numbers for a long time. By the time they reached the building, Nathan had made exactly one decision. He needed help. He called his house manager, Diane Chu, who had run his household staff for 7 years, and who Nathan had always privately believed was more competent than half his executive team. She arrived within 40 minutes with a calm that suggested she had either handled infant emergencies before or was simply constitutionally unshakable. And she assessed the situation with the same expression she used when his plumbing backed up or his security system malfunctioned. "I'll need a list," she said. "Get everything," Nathan said. "Whatever it needs. Money is not the—" "Mr. Caldwell." Diane looked at him over her reading glasses. "I need a list because there are things a baby needs that cannot be purchased at 11 o'clock at night. And the first item on that list is a feeding schedule. Has he been fed recently?" Nathan looked at the baby. The baby looked at Nathan. Neither of them had the answer. They figured it out. Diane found formula in the bag Serena had left. Lucas drank it with the single-minded intensity of someone who had been waiting a very long time for someone to get their act together, which Nathan found both reassuring and mildly accusatory. Then he cried for 40 minutes because he needed to be changed, which Nathan discovered through a process of elimination that left him standing in his master bathroom at midnight, holding a soiled diaper like it was a biohazard, and wondering, in all seriousness, if there was a service he could hire for this specific task. There was not. Or rather, there were services, but they required at minimum a 48-hour advance booking, which Lucas was not prepared to accommodate. Diane changed him. Nathan watched and tried to learn. The mechanics of it were not complicated. The willingness required was a different matter, and Nathan was self-aware enough to understand that what he felt in that bathroom was not disgust, but something closer to vertigo. The sensation of a man who has always known exactly what he is good at suddenly confronted with something he is completely unprepared for. By 2 in the morning, Lucas was asleep in a makeshift arrangement of cushions and a shallow drawer that Diane had lined with a soft blanket. "Just for tonight, you need a proper bassinet tomorrow." Placed beside Nathan's bed, and Nathan was lying on top of the covers fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. He picked up his phone. Put it down. Picked it up again. He had 17 unread messages from his lawyer, 2 from his CFO, and 1 from his executive assistant asking about the morning meeting. He had nothing from Serena. He typed her number 3 times and deleted it twice. On the 3rd attempt, he sent a single message. "He's asleep. He's okay." The reply came back in under 2 minutes, which told him she'd been awake, waiting. "Thank you for telling me." Nathan stared at those 4 words for a long time. He didn't sleep much that night. Lucas woke twice, once at 3 and again at 5. And both times Nathan was already awake, lying in the dark, doing the thing he did when he was working through a problem, running variables, identifying the unknown factors, trying to build a framework that made sense of data that kept rearranging itself. The data was, he had a son. His ex-wife had carried that son alone through a pregnancy she'd never told him about. She had shown up at a hospital and handed him a child and a folder of legal documentation, and then gotten into a car and driven away. And he, a man who prided himself on reading situations faster than anyone in the room, had not seen any of it coming. At 5:15, Lucas started crying again. Nathan got up, went to the makeshift bed, stood over the baby for a moment. "Okay," he said quietly. "We're doing this again." He picked Lucas up with marginally more confidence than the first time. The baby's face was red, and his eyes were scrunched shut, and his fists were curled tight against his chest, in that particular newborn way that looked like fury, and was probably just the reflex of someone who had very recently arrived in a world that was startling in every direction. Nathan held him against his shoulder the way Diane had shown him, hand flat against the small back. Lucas cried for another few minutes, then gradually stopped. Nathan stood in the dark penthouse in his rumpled dress shirt, swaying slightly. Not because anyone had told him to, just because his body had apparently decided on its own that this was what the moment required, and felt something shift in him that he couldn't name. It wasn't softness, exactly. Nathan Caldwell had not gotten to where he was by being soft, but there was something about the weight of this small person, the way Lucas had stopped crying, not because anything had been fixed, but simply because he had been held, that landed somewhere in Nathan's chest and stayed there. He thought about Serena, about the night 14 months ago, which he had filed away and tried not to think about, about the marriage before that, the version of their life together that had been good before it wasn't, which Nathan had also filed away because that was what he did with things that hurt. He had been very good at filing things away. He was beginning to suspect that was not the compliment he had always taken it for. By the end of the first week, Nathan had hired a night nurse named Vonda, who had 30 years of newborn experience and who communicated primarily through exhausted competence and occasional dry commentary about first-time fathers who acted like they were running a board meeting. He had also converted the second guest suite into a nursery, a project that took Diane and a specialty service 3 days, and which Nathan had overseen with the same micromanaging attention to detail he brought to property acquisitions, which Diane tolerated and Vonda appeared to find hilarious. The crib was the right crib. Nathan had researched it. The mattress had the right firmness rating. The monitor was the highest-rated system on the market, with both audio and video capability and a backup battery. The temperature in the room was maintained at 68 degrees because he had read 3 separate sources that said 68 was optimal. Lucas didn't care about any of this and cried anyway. "He's not a project," Vonda said one evening, watching Nathan consult the feeding schedule he had built in a spreadsheet. "You know that, right?" Nathan looked up. "I'm trying to understand the pattern." "There isn't one. Not yet. He's 9 days old." "Everything has a pattern." Vonda sat down across from him with the particular patience of someone who had had this exact conversation 17 times with different men in different expensive apartments. "Mr. Caldwell, he doesn't need a pattern right now. He needs a person. That's it. That's the whole job." Nathan looked at the spreadsheet, looked at the bassinet in the corner of the living room where Lucas was briefly asleep, looked back at the spreadsheet. "I'll keep the spreadsheet," he said. Vonda nodded. "Of course you will." But something she said stayed with him. He needs a person. Nathan was used to being useful in specific quantifiable ways. He could acquire things, structure deals, solve problems that had solutions. This was different. There was no acquisition strategy. There was no closing argument. There was just a small person who needed to be held and fed and talked to, and the talking was the part Nathan found most disorienting because he had spent a career in rooms where words were leverage, and there was no leverage here. There was just the sound of a voice, and whether it was familiar and steady, and whether it helped. He started talking to Lucas, not narrating, not the performative baby talk he had observed other people doing and had always found slightly undignified, but just talking, the way he might talk through a problem with himself. Standing in the kitchen at 6 in the morning while he waited for the bottle to warm, Lucas in the crook of his arm. "The Meridian deal is supposed to close next month. I don't know that I trust the lead developer. His numbers were too clean. Clean numbers always worry me." Lucas staring at the ceiling with the ancient, unfocused gaze of the very newly born. "You probably don't have opinions on real estate investment risk. That's fine. I'm not asking." He called his attorney, Richard Moss, on day 3. Richard had been his lawyer for 11 years and knew Nathan well enough not to waste words. "What do you need?" Richard said. "Tell me what I'm looking at legally. Full picture. You want custody arrangements? I want to understand my obligations and my rights, in that order." There was a pause. "That's an unusual order for you." Nathan thought about Lucas asleep in the bassinet. "Things are unusual right now." Richard walked him through it. Paternity was established, which gave Nathan standing. If Serena was willing to work out an agreement collaboratively, it could be structured around the child's needs without litigation. If not, a court would determine custody based on what was best for Lucas, and Nathan's financial resources would be a factor in his favor, as would his demonstrated willingness to provide for the child. "You said demonstrated willingness," Nathan said. "What does that look like?" "Showing up," Richard said. "Consistently. Over time. Courts aren't impressed by money in custody cases. They're impressed by presence." Nathan sat with that. "One more thing," Richard said. "I looked into Serena Hartwell, her finances, recent filings." A pause. "Nathan, do you know what she's been dealing with medically?" He did not. The investigator Nathan hired was named Carl Whitfield, and he had the kind of face that suggested he had spent a long time looking at things people didn't want found. He sat across from Nathan in the penthouse study on a Thursday afternoon and set a folder on the desk between them with the careful movements of a man who understood the weight of what was inside. "I want to be clear," Carl said, "that most of this is from hospital records your ex-wife consented to share. Her legal team provided partial disclosure as part of the paternity documentation. The rest is public record." "Tell me," Nathan said. Serena Hartwell was diagnosed with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy 18 months ago. That's a structural heart condition. The wall of the heart thickens, which can cause arrhythmia, obstruction, and in severe cases, sudden cardiac events. Carl's voice was even, which Nathan appreciated. Her cardiologist advised against pregnancy. Strongly. Nathan said nothing. "She was already pregnant when she received that advice," Carl continued. "She had been pregnant for approximately 6 weeks, and the timing—" He paused. "The timing aligns with your last contact with her." The study was very quiet. "She knew," Nathan said. "She knew when she was pregnant that the pregnancy was dangerous." "Yes." "And she proceeded." "Yes." Nathan stood up. He walked to the window. The lake was gray and flat under a November sky, and he stared at it for a long time without seeing it. "How dangerous?" he said. Carl was quiet for a moment. Her team pushed hard for monitoring throughout. There were 2 acute episodes during the pregnancy, heart rate irregularities that required hospitalization. The delivery itself was high risk. The hospital kept her for observation afterward. He paused. "She's currently receiving outpatient treatment. Her condition is manageable with medication, but it's chronic." Nathan turned from the window. "Where is she?" "Nathan." "Carl. Where is she right now?" Carl looked at him for a moment. "She's in New York. Outpatient cardiac program at Weill Cornell. She's been there since she left Chicago." Nathan sat back down at his desk. He looked at the folder. He thought about the woman he had been married to for 3 years. The woman he had let go of because it had been easier than fixing what was broken. He thought about her sitting in a cardiologist's office being told that the pregnancy she was carrying would put her life at risk. He thought about her making that decision alone. He thought about the night she had appeared at Mercy General, thin in her gray coat, holding Lucas with both arms. The way she'd placed the envelope on the railing and told him everything's in there, and the way that sentence had sounded like a woman who had planned for the possibility that she might not be around to say it again. His hands pressed flat against the desk. "What's the current prognosis?" he said. His voice was controlled because he had trained it to be. But under the control was something he wasn't sure he had felt in a very long time. "With compliance to her treatment protocol, her doctors are cautiously optimistic," Carl said. "But it's a long-term management situation, not a cure." Nathan nodded slowly. He picked up the folder, opened it, read the first page, closed it. He had spent his entire career moving toward things, deals, acquisitions, leverage points. He had almost never paused to consider what he was moving away from in the process. He looked at the baby monitor on his desk. Vonda had insisted on a second unit in the study, and he had agreed without argument, which told him something about how fast his own internal landscape had shifted in the past 2 weeks. Lucas was asleep. The monitor showed the small, steady rise and fall of his breathing. Nathan sat in his study for a long time after Carl left. He didn't make calls. He didn't open his email. He just sat there with the folder on the desk in front of him and the monitor on and the sound of his son's breathing in the background, and he thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. His choices, Serena's choices, the choices neither of them had known they were making while they were making them. He had been a man who believed that information was power, who believed that the person with the most complete picture of a situation was always the person in control. He had been wrong. He had had no idea what was happening in the life of the woman he had once loved, even as she had been carrying the most significant thing either of them had ever created. He had been sitting in boardrooms executing billion-dollar transactions while Serena had been in a hospital being told that the life inside her might cost her her own. That was not strategy. That was not control. That was a man who had confused knowing everything about his business with knowing everything about his life. He picked up his phone. He called Richard Moss. "I'm not going to litigate anything," Nathan said. "I need you to set up a conversation, just a conversation, between me and Serena's legal team, informal. I want to understand what she needs." "That's—" Richard paused. "That's a different approach than I expected." "I know," Nathan said. "Do it anyway." He ended the call, set the phone down, looked at the folder one more time. He thought about what Serena had said on the hospital steps, the things she'd said that he hadn't quite heard because he'd been too busy managing his own reaction. He needs stability. Not, he needs money. Not, he needs the best of everything. Not, he needs your lawyers and your resources and your ability to close. Stability, which was a thing you couldn't acquire, a thing you had to become. Nathan Caldwell was 51 years old and had been becoming something specific for 30 years, driven, certain, relentless, decisive. He was very good at that version of himself. He looked at the baby monitor. He thought about what it would mean to become something else. Watch. That night, Vonda left at 10, and Nathan sat in the armchair beside the crib in the nursery, too awake to sleep, and watched Lucas sleep with that particular newborn intensity that was somehow both completely peaceful and terribly vulnerable. And he had the specific experience, one he had not had in a very long time, of wanting to undo something. Not a deal, not a decision, not a position he'd taken in a negotiation. Himself, or at least the version of himself that had been so committed to the life he'd built that he'd let the people in that life become secondary to the structure of it. He reached into the crib and put one hand lightly on Lucas's chest. The baby didn't wake. Nathan held very still. He stayed like that for a while. He would call Serena tomorrow. Not through lawyers, not through systems and channels and formal processes. He would call her himself, the way he should have called her 100 times during the year they'd been apart. And he would say what he hadn't known how to say then, that he was listening, that he was present, and that for the first time in his adult life he was willing to be led by someone other than his own ambition. He was not sure it would be enough. He had no guarantee. He was a man who had built his life on the certainty of outcomes, and there was no certainty here. But Lucas was breathing under his hand, steady and slow and utterly trusting, and Nathan Caldwell stayed. For now, that was enough. He called her at 8 in the morning, which was earlier than he'd intended because he'd been awake since 5, and the waiting had become its own kind of pressure. It rang 4 times. He had already decided what he would say if she didn't answer, had written it out mentally, organized it the way he organized everything, into points with logical sequence. Then the call connected, and Serena said Nathan, in a voice that told him she had been expecting it, and all the organized points dissolved. "How are you feeling?" he said. Not what he'd planned to open with, but the question that had been sitting in his chest since Carl Whitfield had closed the folder on his desk and left. A pause on her end. Not long. "I'm okay." That's not an answer. It's the one I have right now. He could hear something in the background on her end, the particular quiet of a medical environment, that specific acoustic texture of monitored spaces. He thought about what Carl had told him. Weill Cornell, outpatient cardiac program. He pressed forward before he could talk himself into being careful. "I know about the diagnosis," he said. "I know about what happened during the pregnancy, the hospitalizations, all of it." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. "Carl Whitfield," she said finally. Not a question. "Yes." Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was measured in the way Serena's voice got when she was managing something, when she was deciding how much to give and how much to hold back. He had heard that voice across the breakfast table 100 times. He had spent most of their marriage responding to it by either pushing harder or withdrawing entirely, and he was beginning to understand that both of those had been the wrong choice. "I was going to tell you," she said. "I want you to know that. It wasn't a decision I made easily. I know. I didn't want you to stay for the wrong reasons. If you'd known I was sick, she stopped. You would have come back. I know you. You would have shown up and taken over and made everything about managing the situation, and I needed... She paused again. I needed to do that part on my own. Nathan sat with that. It landed in a way that was uncomfortable because she was right, and he knew she was right. And the knowledge that he had been so predictable in his patterns that she had anticipated his response before it ever happened was not a flattering thing to sit with. I'm not calling to argue about what you should have done, he said. I'm calling because Lucas is 3 weeks old and I don't know how to do this without you being part of it. And I'm calling because... He stopped, took a breath. Because I spent the night reading a medical file and I need to know you're actually okay. Not for the lawyers, just for me. The silence this time was different, softer. I'm managing, she said. The program here is good. The medication is working. My last echo was better than the one before. Good, he said. Then, because he was still learning how to do this, how to stay in a moment instead of resolving it and moving on, that's good, Serena. He's really okay, Lucas? He's fine. He's sleeping in a crib I apparently over-researched. A pause. The night nurse thinks I'm running a military operation. Something in Serena's breath changed. Not quite a laugh, but close. You made a spreadsheet, didn't you? The spreadsheet is a tool. It's helpful. Nathan, it has color coding. This time she did laugh, just briefly, and it was the first real thing that had passed between them in over a year. Not the careful, formal language of people who had once been married and were now navigating something complicated, but just two people who knew each other. I want to see him, she said. Her voice was quieter now. When I can travel, when my doctor clears it. Tell me when, Nathan said. I'll handle the rest. There was a pause, and he knew what she was thinking before she said it. He could feel her pulling back from the word handle, from the particular flavor of that word in his mouth, which had always meant, I'll take over more than it meant I'll help. I'll let you know, she said instead. We'll figure it out. It wasn't a yes, it wasn't a no. It was the most honest thing either of them had managed, and Nathan decided to accept it for what it was. After the call, he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while he wasn't paying attention, and Vonda came in with Lucas and handed him over with the wordless efficiency of a woman who had correctly assessed that her employer needed something to do with his hands. Nathan held Lucas against his chest and looked out at the lake. Your mother is smart, he said. Lucas blinked at the ceiling. Smarter than me, which is going to be an adjustment. Lucas made a small sound that was probably gas, but that Nathan had begun interpreting as commentary. Don't be smug, Nathan said. It's not a good look. He sat there for a while, holding his son in the morning quiet, and for the first time in 3 weeks, he wasn't running scenarios or building frameworks or trying to map the situation onto a model he already understood. He was just there, in his kitchen, with a cup of cold coffee and an infant who smelled like baby shampoo and needed nothing from him in that moment except his presence. It was not a feeling Nathan had much experience with, but he was starting to recognize it. He was starting to think it might be important. The weeks that followed had a shape Nathan hadn't expected. He had assumed that having Vonda, experienced, competent, unflappable Vonda, would mean that his days would return to something like their previous rhythm, that he would handle Lucas's needs efficiently and then resume his working life, managing from a distance, delegating the texture of daily care the way he delegated everything else that couldn't be optimized by his personal attention. That was not what happened. What happened was that he started waking up before Vonda arrived, not because Lucas needed him, Vonda was there for the night, but because he was awake anyway, and the monitor was on his nightstand, and at some point around week 4, he stopped fighting the pull of it and just got up. He would take Lucas for the early morning feed, sit in the armchair in the nursery while it was still dark outside, bottle warming in his hand, the baby working at it with focused intensity, and the city somewhere below them still mostly asleep. Nathan had always been a morning person in the operational sense. He had used early mornings as a weapon, getting into the office before everyone else, clearing his head, building momentum. But this was different. This was not productive. This was just sitting in a dark room with a small person who didn't know what day it was or what year it was, or that his father was one of the most influential real estate developers in the Midwest. Nathan found he didn't mind. He talked, still. It had become a habit he'd stopped questioning. He talked about the properties he was managing, about Marcus's inexplicable loyalty to a parking spot that was technically a loading zone, about the way Chicago looked in November when the lake got rough. He talked about things he didn't usually talk about. The neighborhood he'd grown up in on the South Side, the apartment his mother had kept spotless on a budget that had no business being stretched as far as she stretched it, the way he'd watched her work herself into exhaustion and promised himself he'd build something so stable that exhaustion would never be necessary again. "That's where I got it from," he said one morning, Lucas finishing the last of the bottle, already drowsy. "The drive. I thought I was doing it for the right reasons. I still think the reasons were right. He shifted the baby to his shoulder, rubbing the small back in circles the way Vonda had shown him. "I think somewhere along the way I confused the means with the goal. And I didn't notice for a long time." Lucas burped with considerable authority. "Fair," Nathan said. He was in the office for several hours most days, but he had stopped scheduling the 12 and 14-hour stretches that had defined his professional life for the past decade. His assistant, Priya, had adapted to this with the efficiency of someone who had been quietly anticipating the change for years, and his executive team had adapted with varying degrees of grace. His COO, David Park, with genuine relief. His CFO, Margaret Holden, with the raised eyebrow of a woman who would believe it when she saw it sustained. "You look different," David said one afternoon, standing in Nathan's office doorway. He had the particular expression of someone trying to diagnose something without enough information. "Different how?" Nathan said without looking up from the report he was reviewing. "Less like you're calculating how to acquire the building we're standing in." "I own this building. That's kind of my point." David came in and sat down. He was 43 and had worked for Nathan for 8 years, which was the longest tenure on the executive team by a significant margin. He was also the only person who spoke to Nathan in something resembling a direct line. "Can I ask about the baby?" Nathan looked up. "Carefully," David added. "He's fine," Nathan said. "He's at home with the night nurse. She works days too now." Nathan paused. "She works flexible hours. It's an arrangement." David nodded slowly. "And how are you doing with all of it? Because 3 weeks ago you called me from a hospital parking lot sounding like a man who had just been informed the laws of physics no longer applied." "I was processing. You were also, and I say this with respect, clearly terrified." Nathan considered denying this, then considered the fact that David had been in the room when Nathan had failed to close 3 separate deals in 1 week because he'd been distracted, which was unprecedented, and which David had covered for without being asked. "I was not prepared," Nathan said. "It was as close as he was going to get." "And now?" "Now I'm less unprepared." He set down the report. "She has a heart condition, David. My ex-wife. She carried this child knowing it could kill her, and she didn't tell anyone." David was quiet. "I keep thinking about that," Nathan said. "About the sheer—" He stopped, started again. "She made that decision alone. She was sick and scared, and she managed the whole thing herself. And I was here, closing deals, completely unaware." He looked out the window. "I keep thinking about what kind of man that makes me. You didn't know. I should have known, not about the pregnancy, but about her. I should have. When we separated, I should have made sure she was okay. I didn't. I structured the divorce the way I structure everything. Efficiently, minimize the exposure." "Nathan, it's not self-pity," Nathan said. His voice was even. "It's accounting. I'm looking at what I did and what I didn't do, and I'm building an honest picture of it. Because the version of myself that treated his marriage like a transaction to be unwound cleanly, I don't want to be that person anymore." He picked up the report again. "That's all." David looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded, stood up. "For what it's worth," he said from the doorway, "you've been a better person to work for this past month than you've been in the last 2 years, which probably says something." Nathan looked up. "I'll take it," he said. The call from Serena's cardiologist came through Richard Moss, which was unusual enough that Nathan read the message twice before calling back. A doctor, Anita Voss at Weill Cornell, was careful and professional and clearly operating within the parameters of what Serena had consented to share, but the substance of what she said was plain. Serena's recent tests had shown measurable improvement, but the recovery was slower than hoped, and she was going to need stable, low-stress circumstances for the foreseeable future. She asked me to contact you, Dr. Voss said. She wanted you to hear it from me directly rather than through her because— a pause. Because she said you respond better to data than to feelings. Nathan sat very still. She said that. Yes. She's not wrong, he said. Mr. Caldwell. The doctor's voice was not unkind. Serena has been managing this diagnosis largely on her own. Her support system in New York is limited. She hasn't wanted to burden anyone. The careful, measured pause of a professional who had something to say and was choosing her words. I think she's exhausted in a way that isn't only physical. I know, Nathan said. She's also— Another pause. She's struggling with the separation from Lucas. She doesn't say so directly, but it's present. Nathan put the phone down after the call and sat in his study for a long time. He thought about the logistics. It wasn't complicated at the level of logistics. He could have a plane ready in 4 hours. He could arrange whatever needed to be arranged. But logistics had always been his reflex, and he was trying to build a new reflex, one that asked the actual question first rather than jumping to the mechanism. The actual question was, what did Serena need, and was Nathan capable of providing it in a way that helped rather than overwhelmed? He called her directly this time. I spoke with Dr. Voss, he said when she picked up. A beat. She called you. You asked her to. I wanted you to have the full picture, she said. Her voice was tired, more tired than the last call. Serena. He said her name carefully. I want to come to New York. Nathan. Not to take over, not to manage anything. I just want to— He stopped, started again. I want to sit with you for a few hours. That's it. Bring Lucas. Let you see him. Let us— I don't know. Try to figure out what this looks like going forward, when we're in the same room and not doing it through lawyers. There was a long pause. My apartment is not— She hesitated. I'm at a short-term rental. It's not set up for a baby. I'll book a hotel. Something with space. You can come there. He paused. Or not. Whatever you're comfortable with. Another pause. This one softer. He's grown, she said, quietly. He has. He has opinions now. About what? Bath time, the bottle temperature. Marcus is driving, apparently. He cries every time we hit a pothole. A pause. I have a spreadsheet. She was quiet for a moment, then, okay, she said. Come to New York. They went the following Thursday. Nathan, Lucas, Vonda, and Marcus, who drove them to the airport and who Nathan had noticed had become quietly proprietary about Lucas in the way that people who have no business being attached to an infant become attached anyway. Vonda handled the logistics of traveling with a 6-week-old with the calm efficiency of a woman who found infant airport logistics more manageable than first-time father airport anxiety, which she communicated primarily through the expression she maintained throughout security. Nathan had stayed in New York hundreds of times. He had a preferred hotel, a preferred suite, a preferred table at 4 different restaurants, and a professional relationship with the concierge at the Meridian on 57th Street that dated back 11 years. He booked the corner suite, which had a separate sitting room, in which he had Diane outfit in advance with everything Lucas might need. Proper bassinet this time, no drawer cushion arrangements. Serena arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Nathan opened the door, and they looked at each other for a moment that felt longer than it was. She was thinner than she'd been at the hospital. Her color was not right. Not dramatically, but enough that if you knew her, if you had spent 3 years sitting across from her at breakfast and watching the way color came and went in her face with her moods, you would notice. Her hair was down, which she didn't usually do in the middle of the day, and she was wearing a sweater that was too big for her in the way of someone who has lost weight they weren't trying to lose. But she was standing. She was upright and present and looking at him with those careful dark eyes, and she was okay. She was okay enough. Hi, she said. Hi, he said, and then a sound came from the interior of the suite. Not a cry, just Lucas doing the particular vocalizing he had started doing in week 5. Practicing sounds with the same methodical repetition Nathan recognized from his own approach to new skills. And Serena's whole face changed. He stepped back. She came in. She crossed the room to the bassinet in the sitting area and stood over it for a long moment. Nathan stayed in the doorway between the rooms and watched her face do something complicated. Relief and grief and love and guilt all moving across it in quick succession, and none of it controlled, none of it managed, just present and raw in a way that Serena Hartwell almost never allowed herself in front of other people. She reached in and picked him up. Lucas looked at her with the slightly suspicious focus of a baby encountering someone he recognized from some earlier, softer time. And then he settled against her chest with a sound that was not quite a sigh but was close, and Serena closed her eyes and held him, and Nathan stayed where he was and did not say anything because there was nothing to say that wouldn't be less than what this moment required. After a while, she sat down on the couch, Lucas still in her arms. Nathan came and sat in the chair across from her. Not too close, not the way he might have sat before, taking up the space between them as a matter of habit. "He's bigger," she said softly, not looking up from Lucas. 6 pounds 11 ounces when we left the hospital, Nathan said. "He's almost 9 now. Vonda says he's doing fine. I have the chart if—" Serena looked up, something between exasperation and amusement. "I'm kidding," Nathan said. Then, "I'm mostly kidding. I can pull it up if you want to see the weight progression." She looked back down at Lucas. "Sure," she said softly. "Later." They sat like that for a while. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it wasn't unbearable either. And Nathan was learning to tell the difference between silences that meant something was wrong and silences that just meant two people hadn't yet found the right words. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you," she said. She was still looking at Lucas. Her voice was very quiet. "I went back and forth on it. I had arguments on both sides. I kept convincing myself I had more time to decide, and then I didn't." "I know," Nathan said. "I wasn't protecting you," she said. "I want to be honest about that. I was protecting myself." She looked up then, briefly, direct in the way Serena was always direct when she decided to be. "I was afraid of what you would say, what you would do. I was afraid you would—" She stopped. "I was afraid you would make it easier for me to stop." Nathan sat with that. The honesty of it was uncomfortable in the specific way that honesty about something true always is. "Stop the pregnancy," he said. "Yes." "Was that a serious risk?" She looked down again. "I don't know. I don't know what I would have done. I was scared and I was sick and I loved him already, which I know doesn't make rational sense at 6 weeks, but it was true anyway." A pause. "I didn't want anyone telling me what the rational choice was." Nathan leaned forward, elbows on knees. "I would have stayed," he said. "I want you to know that. If I had known, whatever else was wrong between us, I would have stayed." Serena was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "That's the other thing I was afraid of." He looked at her. "What does that mean?" "It means—" She exhaled, shifted Lucas slightly. "It means I didn't want to be the reason you stayed. I didn't want to be the obligation. We were already over, Nathan. The marriage was over, and I didn't want—" She looked at him steadily. "I didn't want you to stay because you felt responsible. I didn't want to spend years watching you stay out of duty." The room was quiet. "You could have let me make that choice," Nathan said. "Yes," she said. "I could have. That was wrong. I'm not asking you to forgive me for it right now. I'm just explaining it." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not angry," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I was for about 48 hours after I found out. And then He gestured vaguely toward Lucas. "He has a way of making certain things feel less important." Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, but close. "He's very good at that," she said softly. Nathan stretched his legs out, settled into the chair more fully, the way a man does when he's decided to stay somewhere. "Tell me what the doctors are saying, specifically. Not the version you're giving people so they don't worry." She looked at him. "Serena." She looked back at Lucas. A long pause. Then she started talking, in the careful clinical language she had clearly absorbed from months of appointments, about the echo results, and the medication adjustments, and the things that were improving and the things that weren't, and Nathan listened without interrupting, without immediately jumping to what could be done about it, or who he could call, or how it could be optimized. He just listened, and when she was finished, he asked 2 questions, both of them about her, not about the logistics, and she answered them, and he thought about how many conversations they had never had during their marriage because he had always moved too quickly from listening to solving. Vonda appeared from the bedroom with a bottle. 6:30 feeding, she said to no one in particular, with the bearing of a woman who had assessed the room and correctly determined that her employer was managing and did not require intervention. Serena looked up. "You must be Vonda." "That's right." Vonda handed her the bottle. "He likes it about 10 degrees warmer than the instructions say. I'll leave you to it." She disappeared back into the bedroom with the discretion of someone who understood exactly what was happening and exactly how much space it needed. Serena fed Lucas. Nathan watched them both. The light in the room was going orange with late afternoon, and the city outside was doing what New York does in November. Gray and busy and indifferent to the specific weight of moments happening inside buildings. And Nathan thought about the 3 years of their marriage, and all the evenings he had come home late, or not come home. All the dinners he'd shortened, all the trips he'd cut short, because something needed his attention, always something needed his attention. And the slow erosion that had built from that, which he had noticed and told himself was temporary, and which had turned out to be anything but. "I want to do this differently," he said. He wasn't sure if he was talking about right now or about all of it. Serena didn't look up from Lucas. "Different how?" "I don't know exactly," he admitted. "I know I want to. I want to be where he is, consistently, not managed from a distance." He paused. "And I know I want you to be okay, whatever that requires." She looked up at that. "Nathan, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. This isn't me trying to—" He stopped, started again. He was not used to fumbling for language. He found he didn't mind as much as he would have expected. "I'm not asking you to be anything except okay. I want you to be okay, and I want to be someone who helps with that rather than complicates it." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's not who you've always been," she said. "Not cruel, just honest." "No," he agreed. "It's not. Why is it different now?" He looked at Lucas, who had finished the bottle and was watching the ceiling with the focused interest of someone tracking something no adult could perceive. "Because he is," Nathan said. "And because spending 6 weeks realizing how much I didn't know has a way of rearranging things." He met her eyes. "Because I was very certain about a lot of things for a very long time, and it turned out the certainty was mostly ego." Serena looked at him, then she looked down at Lucas. "I need you to be patient," she said finally. "I need you to not move fast. This is—" She paused. "This is a lot. Everything is a lot. And I can't—" She pressed her lips together briefly. "I can't have the big version of you right now, the one who swoops in and organizes everything. I need the smaller version." "I don't know that I've ever been the smaller version," Nathan said. "I know," she said. "I'm asking you to learn." He thought about Vonda telling him he wasn't running a project. He thought about David saying he was different. He thought about sitting in the armchair in the nursery at 5 in the morning talking to an infant about investment risk, and the way that had not felt foolish but had felt, somehow, like the most honest thing he'd done in years. "Okay," he said. She looked up, skeptical. He didn't blame her. "Okay," he said again. "I'll try." She looked at him for another moment. Then she shifted Lucas in her arms and held him out. Nathan leaned forward and took him, more easily than the first time, the motion already becoming something like instinct. And Lucas looked up at him with those dark, unfocused eyes. And Nathan held him close and felt the weight of everything that was still broken and everything that was possibly, tentatively, beginning. Outside the window, New York was going dark, and neither of them spoke for a while, and that was all right. Because for the first time in a long time, the silence between Nathan Caldwell and Serena Hartwell was not the silence of 2 people who had run out of things to say. It was the silence of 2 people who were, slowly and imperfectly, and with no guarantees, learning to start again. They fell into a rhythm that neither of them named, because naming it would have required a conversation about what it was, and they were not ready for that conversation yet. Serena came back to Chicago in December. not permanently. She was careful about that word, careful about any word that implied a fixed state when everything still felt provisional. But her New York lease was month to month. Her treatment had been transferred to a cardiologist at Northwestern Memorial named Dr. James Okafor, and the practical reality was that Lucas was in Chicago and she needed to be near Lucas. She told Nathan this on the phone, plainly, without framing it as anything other than what it was. He listened and didn't push it further than that. She didn't move back into the penthouse. That was also clear, and Nathan didn't suggest it. He found her a 2-bedroom apartment 12 blocks away, not through his company, which would have felt like ownership, but through an independent realtor, and he paid the deposit without mentioning it until after the lease was signed, which Serena caught and addressed directly. "Don't do things behind my back," she said, "even good things. I need to know what you're doing." I know what you thought. You thought if you asked first I'd say no, and you were probably right, but that's not the point." She looked at him evenly. "The point is you need to ask first anyway." "Understood," he said. And he meant it, which was the difference between this version of Nathan and the previous one. She let him pay the deposit, but she paid the rent herself. From the freelance design consulting she had kept going quietly throughout the pregnancy, which Nathan had not known about, which told him more about how much Serena had kept hidden, not maliciously, but out of a fierce private determination to remain her own person, than almost anything else. They built something that was not quite co-parenting and not quite reconciliation and not quite friendship. Lucas was the structure of it. Mondays, Wednesdays, and alternate weekends, Serena had him at her apartment. The rest of the time, he was at the penthouse. But the handoffs, which Nathan had expected to be logistically clean exchanges at the door, turned out to be longer than that. Serena would come up for coffee. Nathan would walk her back down, and they'd stand in the lobby talking longer than either of them intended. Lucas was a convenient excuse for contact that neither of them would have initiated without him. "You're using my son as a pretext," Serena said one evening, not unkindly, when she'd been sitting in Nathan's kitchen for 2 hours and had just noticed the time. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Nathan said, refilling her coffee. "Nathan." He was fussing. I needed backup. "He's been asleep for an hour and 40 minutes. Nathan looked at the baby monitor. Lucas was in the bassinet in the sitting room, deeply asleep, making the soft, rhythmic sounds of an infant with no concept of the complicated adults orbiting him. "The coffee is good," Nathan said. Serena looked at him for a long moment. Then she wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't leave for another 30 minutes, and neither of them said anything significant about that. Dr. Okafor's first full evaluation came in mid-December. Nathan drove Serena to the appointment, which she hadn't asked him to do but had not objected to when he offered, and he sat in the waiting room with Lucas in the carrier against his chest, a piece of equipment he had initially approached with the suspicion of a man unaccustomed to wearing anything that required assembly, but which he had mastered with the quiet determination he applied to all things. And he read the same page of a business journal 6 times without retaining any of it. Serena came out 40 minutes later. She crossed the waiting room and sat down next to him and looked at the infant carrier for a moment. "He loves that thing," she said. "He's asleep in 30 seconds. It's the movement." Nathan looked at her. "What did he say?" She exhaled. "The medication is working. The thickening in the wall is not reversing him. It doesn't reverse, but it's stable. No progression since the last echo." "That's good," Nathan said carefully. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "He wants to do another Holter monitor in January, just to track the arrhythmia pattern over time." She paused. "He said the delivery stress likely pushed some things that have now settled. The numbers are better than he expected, given what I went through." "That's good," Nathan said again. Then, because he was trying to do this differently, "How do you feel about it?" She looked at him. The question was still slightly foreign coming from him, and they both knew it. "Relieved," she said, "and still scared, both." She looked at Lucas. "He said I should avoid high-stress situations, extended high-stress situations." "Okay." "He asked if my home environment was stable." Nathan said nothing. "I said it was getting there," she said. Nathan looked down at the top of Lucas's sleeping head, visible above the carrier. He thought about the conversation they'd had in November in the New York hotel suite, and the way Serena had said, "I need the smaller version of you." He thought about how much effort it had taken every single day since then to resist the pull toward acquisition and strategy and forward momentum, to let things unfold at their own speed rather than the speed he would impose if left to his own instincts. He was not perfect at it. He had overstepped twice already. Once with a medical reference he'd forwarded to Richard Moss about her condition without telling her. Once with a call he'd made to her New York doctor asking about her medications, which Serena had found out about and which had resulted in a conversation he didn't want to repeat. "I'm trying," he said. "I know," she said, not dismissing it, just acknowledging. "It doesn't come naturally." "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." They sat in the waiting room of Dr. Okafor's office with their son asleep between them and the particular silence of two people who were doing something hard and imperfect and had not yet decided how it would end. Christmas came. This was where things got complicated. Not between Nathan and Serena, or not only there, but with Nathan's family, specifically his older sister, Catherine Caldwell Moore, who arrived from Boston 2 days before Christmas with her husband Gerald and their 3 adult children, and who had been Nathan's primary family connection since their mother died 6 years ago, and who had, as far as Nathan had known, no idea that Serena was back in his life. Catherine found out about Lucas the way Catherine found out about most things Nathan hadn't told her, by arriving without sufficient notice and discovering reality in person. She walked into the penthouse on the 23rd of December and found Nathan on the living room floor with a 2-month-old infant propped against a cushion, making the particular low vocalization he'd discovered Lucas responded to by tracking faces. Catherine stood in the doorway of the living room for approximately 4 seconds. "Nathan," she said. He looked up. "Catherine, you're early." "That," she said, pointing, "is a baby. His name is Lucas. Don't startle him, he's been fussy today." Catherine Caldwell Moore was 56 years old and had raised 3 children and had a professional background in family law and was not a woman who startled easily. But she sat down on the couch very slowly with the specific careful movement of someone whose world has just undergone a quiet tectonic shift. "When?" she said. "He's 9 weeks old." "Nathan?" Her voice went very still. "When were you going to tell me?" "I was going to tell you at Christmas." He looked back at Lucas, who was tracking his face with the focused intensity of a small person discovering that faces are the most interesting things in the world. "I needed to get my footing first." "Your footing," she repeated. "You've had a son for 9 weeks and you needed to get your footing before you told your sister." "Yes." "Is he—" She stopped, started again. "Is he yours?" "Yes, the paternity is confirmed." "And Serena?" Nathan looked up. "She's in Chicago. She's doing better." Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Nathan knew the silence. It was the silence she deployed when she was deciding between saying what she actually thought and saying what was useful, a calculation she had been running since childhood, and which usually landed on useful with some of what she actually thought bleeding in at the edges. "You should have told me," she said. "I know. Not because I needed to know for my own sake. Because you shouldn't have been doing this alone for 9 weeks. She looked at Lucas with an expression that was complicated by the sheer weight of everything she'd just had to recalibrate in under a minute. "Does he eat? Sleep? What is his schedule?" "Vonda handles most of the overnight, but you're doing the early morning feed." She said it like she already knew. "You have that look. The look Mom had when we were infants. Like someone who has been awake at 5 in the morning every day for 2 months and has stopped fighting it." Nathan looked at his sister. "It's not that bad." "I didn't say it was bad." She slid off the couch and sat on the floor across from him, and Lucas, registering a new face, tracked toward her with sudden interest. "Hello," she said, softer, to the baby. Lucas made a sound. "He's Nathan. He looks like you." "I know." "He has Mom's forehead." Nathan looked at his son. He had thought the same thing 2 weeks ago in a particular slant of morning light, and had not been able to say it to anyone because there had not been anyone to say it to. The tightness in his chest was brief but real. "Yeah," he said. "He does." Catherine looked at Nathan across the baby between them, and her expression cycled through several things: exasperation and relief and something that was just the recognizable grief of a sibling who understands that the person they grew up with went through something significant entirely without them. "You're an idiot," she said. "I'm aware. You should have called me on day one. I know that now. I would have come." "I know that too." He looked at her. "I wasn't ready to need help yet." Catherine reached out and let Lucas grasp her finger, which he did immediately and with great conviction. "You are so much like Dad sometimes," she said quietly, "in all the worst ways. I know. And then you turn around and do something that's completely not him at all." She looked at Nathan. "You're on the floor. Do you know how often our father got on the floor?" Nathan said nothing. "Never," Catherine said. "Not once." She looked back at Lucas. "You're on the floor with your son on a Tuesday morning, and you learned how to feed a baby, and you didn't run. That matters." The Christmas that followed was not the kind Nathan had ever hosted before. His penthouse, which had been calibrated for elegance and controlled quiet, became the kind of place that Christmas becomes when there is an infant involved. Slightly chaotic, occasionally loud, full of people moving around a small person who required attention on his own schedule, and who was unimpressed by Gerald Moore's opinions on the equity markets. Catherine's daughter, Priscilla, who was 28 and had worked in pediatric nursing before moving into health administration, took one look at Nathan's setup and spent the better part of a morning reorganizing the nursery in ways that Nathan initially resisted and then grudgingly acknowledged were improvements. Serena came on Christmas afternoon. Nathan had asked her carefully, with appropriate space around the asking, and she had taken 2 days to respond and then said yes in a message that was brief and did not elaborate on her reasons. When she arrived, Catherine was in the kitchen with Gerald, and the Christmas noise level was high enough that Nathan met her at the door with Lucas before the rest of the apartment could descend. Serena had dressed carefully, not formally, a dark green wrap, her hair loose. She looked better than she had in November, more color, less like something essential was running low. "The whole family is here," Nathan said. "I know, you warned me." She looked at Lucas in his arms. "Hi, baby." Lucas, seeing her, did the particular full-body thing he did when he recognized someone, a kind of kinetic alertness, arms moving, face going toward her. "He knows you," Nathan said. "Of course he knows me." She took him from Nathan's arms. "I'm his mother," said simply, without defiance or claim, just as plain fact. Nathan stepped back. Catherine appeared in the hallway. The two women looked at each other. Catherine and Serena had met 4 times during the marriage, twice at family events, once at a company dinner, once when Catherine had come to Chicago for a weekend and the 3 of them had had lunch that had been perfectly cordial and slightly cautious. They were not close, but they were not hostile. They were 2 women who were both, in different ways, trying to figure out what the situation was. "Serena," Catherine said. "Catherine." A pause. "It's good to see you. You look well," said with the particular care of a woman who knew exactly what that person had been through and was choosing her words for it. "Thank you." A pause. "Merry Christmas." "Merry Christmas." Catherine looked at Lucas in Serena's arms. Something moved across her face, the particular expression of a woman who is looking at a baby and seeing all the history behind it simultaneously. "He's incredible." "He is," Serena said softly. The afternoon was not easy, but it was real. Gerald was Gerald, well-meaning, slightly oblivious, who made one comment about the situation being unorthodox that Catherine addressed with a look that stopped him cold. Priscilla was warm and direct in the way of people who work with children professionally, and she and Serena found each other on the subject of pediatric cardiac care with a specificity that left both of them absorbed for 40 minutes in a corner of the living room, while Nathan handled Lucas and felt the particular sensation of watching 2 people make a connection that had nothing to do with him. The meal itself was catered, which Nathan had arranged, which Catherine had accepted without comment, which meant she understood he was operating at capacity on all fronts. Serena ate more than Nathan had seen her eat since she'd been back. She held Lucas through most of dessert. She laughed at something Catherine said, genuinely, briefly, and Nathan noticed and filed it away, not as data, but as something else, something that had to do with wanting the world to contain more of that sound. After dinner, the family moved to the living room, and Nathan found himself in the kitchen with Serena, who was standing at the counter making tea with the easy familiarity of someone who has made tea in this kitchen before and remembers where everything is. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for asking the right way." She poured water into the kettle. "You asked. You gave me space. You didn't follow up 3 times." "I wanted to follow up 3 times." "I know." She looked at him. "That's why it mattered that you didn't." He leaned against the counter. "Catherine likes you." "Catherine doesn't know me well enough to have an opinion yet." "She has one. Trust me." Serena wrapped both hands around the mug. She was quiet for a moment. Through the kitchen doorway, the sounds of the family in the other room. Gerald's voice, Priscilla's laugh, the particular quiet alertness of Lucas being passed between people who were becoming attached to him. "This is strange," she said. Not with distress, just with accuracy. "Yes," he said. "It's also—" She stopped. "What?" She looked at him. Something in her face that was careful and unguarded at the same time, which was a combination Nathan had learned was how Serena looked when she was about to say something true that she hadn't entirely decided to say yet. "It's also good," she said quietly. "Pieces of it. I don't want to make more of it than it is. But—" She looked through the doorway at the living room, at Lucas in Catherine's arms. "He should have a family, the full version, not just 2 adults doing handoffs." "No," Nathan agreed. "He should." The conversation would have continued, or not. It was the kind of moment that could have opened into something larger, or could have been allowed to settle. Except that Lucas chose this exact moment to make his unhappy sound, which was distinctive enough that both Nathan and Serena turned toward it simultaneously, and Serena was already moving. That was December. January brought Nathan back into a version of professional life that was recognizable but not identical to the one he'd had before. The Meridian International deal, the $400 million expansion he'd been building toward for 3 years, was moving into its final phase. The consortium he'd assembled included 2 Singapore-based development groups and a German infrastructure fund, and the timeline had always been aggressive, which had been Nathan's preferred kind of timeline. He was at the office by 8 most mornings and back at the penthouse by 6, which was a difference of 4 hours from his previous life. And those 4 hours were not hours he spent doing anything conventionally productive. They were the hours in which he was present, for the evening feed, for the bath, for the particular nightly ritual of sitting with Lucas until he went down, which sometimes took 20 minutes and sometimes took an hour, depending on what kind of day Lucas had decided to have. Vonda had reduced her hours now that Nathan was more confident. She came in the mornings and left mid-afternoon. The evenings were Nathan's. He was in a meeting in mid-January when his phone buzzed with Serena's name. He would have silenced it previously, would have looked at it, categorized it, responded in the gap between items. Instead, he excused himself. David Park watched him walk out of the room and said nothing, which was how Nathan knew the shift had registered. Serena's voice on the line was level but slightly strained, the specific register of someone controlling something they don't entirely have under control. "I'm at Northwestern," she said. "Dr. Okafor wants to keep me for observation." The Holter monitor picked up something. He was already moving toward the elevator. "How long?" "He said tonight, at least. Maybe tomorrow." A pause. "Lucas is at your place, I know. I wanted to tell you." "I know you did." He pushed the elevator button. "I'm coming." "Nathan, you don't have to." "Serena." He waited. "Let me come." A pause. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." He arrived at Northwestern 40 minutes later, having called Vonda, spoken to Marcus, and notified Priya that he would not be returning to the office. Dr. Okafor's resident met him at the cardiac unit with the calm efficiency of someone managing a family member who appeared to be a Type A professional in the process of not panicking. Serena was in a monitored bed, connected to an EKG. She was not in distress. That was the first thing he checked, registering her color and the rate of her breathing with the involuntary assessment of a man who had spent 3 months paying very close attention to what she looked like when she was and wasn't okay. She looked at him when he came in. "You didn't have to leave a meeting." "I did," he said, and pulled a chair to her bedside. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the ceiling. "It's probably nothing," she said. Okafor says the pattern they caught is worth watching. Could be a medication response. Could be a position during sleep. Could be stress. She said the word with the particular flatness of someone who finds the diagnosis of stress both logical and irritating. What's stressing you? Nathan said. What isn't? Serena. She turned her head to look at him. It's a lot to hold, she said. Lucas and the new doctors and the apartment and being back in Chicago and all the things that being back here brings up. She paused. I'm not sleeping well. Why didn't you tell me? Because I'm trying not to need you for everything, she said. I'm trying to maintain a... She stopped. The sentence didn't quite get where it was going. I need to be able to stand on my own, even with all of this. I spent 2 years losing myself in our marriage, Nathan. I'm not doing that again. He said nothing for a moment. He sat with it, which was something he had been practicing. The discipline of not immediately solving, not immediately responding with a counterposition or a solution, but sitting with what had been said and letting it be true. I know you need that, he said. I'm not asking you to give that up. Sometimes you ask without asking. I know. He looked at her. I'm working on it. I know you are, she said. And there was something in her voice, not exactly softness, but a willingness to believe it. Dr. Okafor came in an hour later. He was a tall man in his early 50s with the particular calm of a cardiologist who understood that his patients spent their time in a particular kind of fear and had calibrated his bedside manner accordingly. He reviewed the monitor readings with both of them present, which Serena had agreed to, and explained what the Holter had caught. A brief episode of elevated ventricular activity, probably nothing acutely dangerous but worth monitoring given her history. I want to look at the medication dosage, he said, and I want to talk about stress management as a serious component of your care, not a footnote. He looked at Serena with the directness of a man who had told patients difficult things many times. You're doing well. The numbers are better than I'd have expected 4 months postpartum given what you went through. But your body has been through a significant trauma, and it needs consistency and calm to continue healing. I know, Serena said. What does your daily schedule look like? She described it. Nathan listened. He heard, in the description, things he hadn't known. The night she was waking at 2 and 3, not because she needed to, but because her mind was running. The days she pushed through fatigue because there was design work that needed to be done. And she had always been the person who pushed through. Dr. Okafor looked at Nathan with the measured look of a physician who has correctly read the relationship in the room. The more supported she is at home, the better her outcomes. I understand, Nathan said. After Dr. Okafor left, the room was quiet. The monitor beeped its steady rhythm. Outside in the hall, the cardiac unit moved through its evening routines. I don't want to be managed, Serena said. She was looking at the ceiling. I know. This is going to make you want to manage everything. I can already hear you planning. I'm not, He stopped. I was. A little. She turned her head to look at him. I was thinking about the sleep issue, he said. I was thinking about whether Vonda could come evenings more often, on the nights you have Lucas, so you're not... Nathan, I know. Ask first. Ask first, she said. Can I ask about Vonda's hours? She looked at him for a moment. Then something shifted in her face, something that was not quite a smile, but was in the direction of one. Yes, she said. You can ask about that. He felt the particular sensation of having navigated something correctly, which was not a feeling he was used to associating with conversations that weren't about business. She stayed overnight. He stayed until 9 when visiting hours ended, and he sat with her through dinner. Hospital food she largely ignored, which he noticed and didn't comment on. And they talked about things that were not the medical situation, which he thought she needed even if she hadn't asked for it. He told her about Catherine's opinion of the nursery reorganization. He told her about Lucas's new habit of staring at his own hands with an expression of profound philosophical confusion. She told him about the design project she was working on, a brand identity for a small sustainable architecture firm in Wicker Park, and he listened and asked questions that were actually about the project, not about the subtext of whether it was too taxing, because he was getting better at listening without immediately routing everything through the filter of his own concern. You're different, she said at 8:15. He was getting ready to leave. Different how? She thought about it. Quieter, she said. Inside. You used to have this. She moved her hand, a gesture towards something he couldn't quite see. This frequency. Like a motor running, even when you were still. I could always feel it. She paused. It's lower now. The frequency. Lucas, he said. Lucas, she agreed, and whatever you've been doing with all this time, you're not spending at the office. He looked at her. Thinking, he said. Mostly. Sitting in the nursery at 5 in the morning thinking. About what? About what I got wrong. He said it simply, without dramatics. There's a lot to work through. She was quiet for a moment. I got things wrong too, she said. I know. I should have. She stopped. There are 100 things I should have done differently. She looked at the monitor beside her, the steady green line of her own heartbeat. I kept thinking if I just handled everything myself, it would be okay. If I just managed it alone, I wouldn't have to. She stopped again. Have to what? She looked at him. Depend on you, she said, and be disappointed. The sentence landed in the room and stayed there. I disappointed you, he said. So many times. Not accusatory, just true. And I know some of it was me. My expectations, my refusal to ask for what I needed instead of waiting for you to see it. But some of it was just, she exhaled, you were never there, Nathan. You were present in the room, and you were not there. He sat with that. He did not argue it. He did not produce evidence to the contrary, because there wasn't any. I know, he said. I don't want that again, she said. Whatever this is, whatever we're building. I cannot do the version where I'm invisible inside it. You won't be, he said. Don't promise things you can't guarantee. I'm not guaranteeing. I'm saying I hear you. That's different. He stood, picked up his jacket. I'll call you in the morning. Nathan. He stopped. She looked at him from the hospital bed, the monitoring equipment steady around her, and her face had the particular expression of a woman who was arriving at something slowly and was not yet sure what it was. Thank you for coming, she said. Always, he said, and left before either of them could do anything with that word. He drove back to the penthouse through January Chicago, the lake invisible in the dark beyond the windows of the town car. Marcus was silent, which was his version of sensitivity. Nathan sat in the back with his phone in his hand and did not look at his email. He thought about what Serena had said, about the frequency, about how he'd been running at a pitch that made real presence impossible, present in body, absent in the ways that matter, which is a very specific kind of failure, the kind that doesn't show up until the damage is done. He thought about the $400 million deal sitting on his desk, the consortium call scheduled for the following week, the timeline he'd built, and the momentum it carried. He thought about Serena in a hospital bed with an elevated heart rate and a cardiologist talking about stress management. He didn't reach any conclusions that night. He went home and relieved Vonda and held Lucas through the 9 o'clock feed, and the baby looked up at him with those dark eyes that were starting to focus properly now, starting to hold things, faces, light, the particular expression his father made when he was working something out. And Nathan sat in the quiet penthouse with his son and let himself not have an answer yet. But somewhere between the hospital and the nursery, something had shifted. He could feel it, low and certain, the way the important things always were, not loud, not sudden, but present and accumulating, like a tide that has been rising longer than anyone noticed and is only now reaching the edge of things. He sat with Lucas until the baby's eyes closed. Then he sat alone in the nursery for a long time after, in the dark. The consortium call was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in February, 9 o'clock Chicago time, which meant 6 in the morning for the Singapore partners and 3 in the afternoon for Frankfurt. Nathan had built his career on calls like this, the kind where the numbers were already agreed upon in principle, and what remained was the performance of certainty, the closing ritual where everyone confirms they are still in, still committed, still pointing the same direction. He was on his second coffee when David Park knocked on his office door at 8:45 and came in without waiting, which was unusual enough that Nathan looked up. The Singapore group moved up the timeline, David said. He set a folder on the desk. Tan emailed last night. They want the development agreement signed by end of March instead of June. Full commitment, no contingencies. Nathan opened the folder, read the first page. What's driving the acceleration? Another bidder. Someone came in from the Hong Kong side, smaller group but faster money. David sat down. Tan says it's not a threat yet, but he wants to know we're serious. We're serious? Then we need to move. The legal team needs 2 weeks for the revised agreement, which means decisions now. David paused. All of them. The Chicago asset question, the management structure for the international arm, and the capital call from the German fund. He paused again, slightly longer. Nathan, this is the one. If this goes, it's the biggest thing you've built. Nathan looked at the folder. He had looked at versions of this folder for 3 years, projections and feasibility studies and market analyses and structural models, all building toward this specific outcome. A $400 million development consortium spanning Singapore, Frankfurt, and a Chicago anchor property that would be the largest mixed-use project he had ever taken on. His name on it, his structure, his legacy, in the language his industry used for things that lasted. He closed the folder. Schedule the call, he said. 9 o'clock. David nodded. Left. Nathan sat with the folder on his desk and drank his coffee and thought about a hospital room in January and a steady green line on a cardiac monitor and a woman saying, "You were never there, Nathan. You were present in the room and you were not there." The call lasted 2 hours. Tanway from the Singapore consortium was precise and warm in the way of a man who had been doing business internationally for 30 years and had calibrated exactly how much warmth was appropriate for each context. Klaus Brenner from the German fund was efficient and slightly blunt, which Nathan had always found refreshing. The legal frameworks were discussed, the timeline adjustment was acknowledged, the capital structure was confirmed. At the end of the call, Tan said, "We are excited about this partnership, Nathan. I think we build something lasting." "I think so too," Nathan said. He ended the call and sat in his office for a long moment. Priya knocked and came in with a follow-up action list. He looked at it, thanked her. She left. He called Serena. She answered on the second ring. He could hear Lucas in the background. It was her morning with him, Tuesday, and she'd taken him to her apartment the night before. The particular vocalizing Lucas did when he was on his playmat and entertaining himself, a rising and falling sound that Nathan had learned to identify at distance. "How is he?" Nathan said. "Good." He rolled, half a roll, from his back to his side. But he was very proud. "He's 4 months old. He's advanced." "You're biased." "Extremely." A pause. "Are you okay? You sound... I had the consortium call this morning. How did it go?" "It went well," Nathan said. "They want to accelerate the timeline, signed by end of March." "That's what you wanted." "Yes." A pause. He could hear her reading him the way she always could. The thing she'd called his frequency, that internal motor, and whether it was running high or low. "What's wrong?" she said. "Nothing's wrong." He paused. "I'm thinking." "About the deal?" "About the deal," he said, "and other things." He looked out his office window at the Chicago skyline, February gray and flat. "Can I see you tonight, both of you?" "I have Lucas." "I know, that's fine." A beat. "I'll bring dinner." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Come at 6. He arrived at her apartment at 6 with food from the Thai place she liked. She had mentioned it once, in passing, back in November, and Nathan had noted it without acknowledging that he'd noted it. And Lucas was on the playmat in the living room doing something very focused with a soft ring toy that he was attempting to fit into his mouth with the methodical persistence Nathan recognized as a family trait. Serena was in the kitchen when he came in. She had that look she got when she'd had a day. Nothing dramatic, just the particular tiredness of a woman managing a baby and design deadlines and a heart condition, the visible weight of holding multiple things at once. "Sit down," he said. "I'll set this up." She looked at him. He looked back. She sat down. He found plates without asking. He knew where she kept them. This apartment had a different layout than the one they'd shared, but she organized things the same way. And the familiarity of knowing that, of being able to move through her kitchen without searching, felt like something he didn't want to look at too directly yet. They ate on the living room floor next to Lucas's playmat, which was not a deliberate choice, but simply the way it happened. They both migrated toward him naturally, the way parents do, orienting around the child like he's the fixed point, and they're figuring out where they fit in relation to it. Lucas grabbed Nathan's finger and held on with the particular grip strength that still surprised him every time. "He's been doing that all day," Serena said, "grabbing everything." "Fine motor development," Nathan said. Serena gave him a look. "I read about it," he said. "I know you did," she said. They ate. Lucas held court. Outside the apartment window, Chicago in February did what it does. Dark early, cold staying, the long middle stretch of a season that hasn't decided to end yet. "The deal," Serena said eventually, setting down her fork. "Tell me what you're thinking." Nathan looked at Lucas. "If I take it, if we accelerate, and I commit to this timeline, the next 18 months are going to look like the last 10 years. Long hours, constant decisions. I'll be managing a consortium across 3 time zones." He paused. "I know what that means. I've done it. I know exactly what I'm like when I'm in the middle of something that size." Serena was quiet. "Lucas is 4 months old," Nathan said. "You're managing a cardiac condition that Dr. Okafor said needs low-stress consistency. And He stopped. "I've been different. These past 4 months I've been different, and I don't want to lose that. I don't want to—" He looked at her. "I don't want to become who I was." "Nathan," she said carefully, "this is your deal. It's what you've been building toward for 3 years. I know. You can't walk away from it because of me." "I'm not walking away because of you," he said. "I'm considering walking away because of who I become when I'm inside something that size." "And who I become," he said it plainly, looking at her, "is not someone who is present, for you or for him." She looked at him for a long time. "That's a significant thing to give up," she said. "Yes. Have you talked to David?" "Not yet." "What does he think?" "I haven't told him I'm considering it. He thinks I'm moving forward." Nathan looked at his hands. "I wanted to talk to you first." She was quiet for a moment. Lucas made a sound and Nathan handed him the ring toy, which he accepted with the solemnity of someone receiving an important document. "I don't want to be the reason you don't build your legacy," Serena said. Her voice was careful. "I need you to hear that. I'm not asking you to shrink yourself." "I know you're not asking." "Then why—" "Because I want to." He looked at her directly. "That's the thing that's different, Serena. I'm not giving something up because you need me to, or because it's the right thing to do, or because some version of duty is making me. I'm sitting here and I'm looking at what the next 18 months would look like, and I don't want it." He paused. "For the first time in my professional life, the deal is not the most important thing in the room." She looked at him. Her eyes were careful and searching, the way they got when she was deciding whether to believe something. She stopped. "What?" "That's either the most honest thing you've ever said to me," she said slowly, "or it's the most effective thing you've ever said to me, and I'm having trouble telling which." He held her gaze. "I know. I understand why you can't tell yet." He looked back at Lucas. "I'm not asking you to believe it all at once. I'm asking you to watch." She exhaled, leaned back against the couch, looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Don't walk away from a $400 million deal tonight," she said. "Sleep on it. Talk to David. Make sure you're not—" She paused. "Make sure you're not doing it for the wrong version of the right reason." "What does that mean?" "It means sometimes people make grand gestures when what's actually needed is just—" She looked at him. "Just showing up, consistently, without the grand gesture." She paused. "Giving up the deal is dramatic. I don't need dramatic. I've had enough dramatic." She met his eyes. "I need someone who calls when he says he'll call and comes to the doctor and is in the nursery at 5 in the morning because he wants to be. Not someone who makes a grand sacrifice and then expects that to carry the weight of everything." Nathan sat with that for a long time. "You think I should take the deal," he said. "I think you should take the deal if you can take it and still be this person," she said. "And I think you should walk away from it if you can't." But I think you need to know which is true before you decide. She looked at him steadily. Because I'm not going to be the reason either way. I'm not taking that on. He nodded slowly. You're right, he said. I usually am, she said. And something in her voice was dry and warm at the same time, a register he hadn't heard in years, the particular tone she had when she was comfortable enough to be herself without guarding it. He drove home that night and did not sleep for a long time. He spent the next 2 days doing what he did when he was working through something real. Not the professional assessment, which was automatic, but the harder kind of accounting, the kind where you look at actual evidence of actual behavior and try to build an honest picture. He went through the past 4 months the way an auditor goes through a set of books, looking for the pattern. He had made the 5 o'clock feeds more often than he'd missed them. He had left meetings for hospital calls. He had sat on the floor of his own living room for a cumulative number of hours that, had you told him a year ago would be the case, he would have found implausible. He had called Serena when he said he would. He had asked before acting, mostly. He had been, measurably, more present than he had been in the decade preceding this one. And in that same 4 months, the business had not collapsed. The Meridian deal was intact. The portfolio had continued to perform. David Park had grown into the operational role with a competence that Nathan had been relying on too little for too long. The machine ran. It ran without him being physically inside it every hour. He called David on Thursday morning. I need to know something, Nathan said. Honestly, if I restructured my involvement in the international consortium, if I took a more limited role, kept the partnership but delegated the day-to-day management, could you run it? David was silent for a moment. Not with surprise, Nathan thought, but with the careful pause of a man who has been waiting for a particular question and is making sure he answers it right. Yes, David said. I could run it. You'd need authority I haven't given you before. I know. Decision authority, not just operational. I know, David said again. Nathan, I've been ready for that for 2 years. I didn't push it because you weren't ready to give it. Nathan sat with that. Fair, he said. Is this about Lucas? It's about a lot of things. But Lucas. Lucas, Nathan said, and Serena, and what kind of man I am when I'm running at full capacity on something like this. A pause. You're a good man, David said. You're also at full capacity on a deal not easy to be around. I know. What are you thinking? I'm thinking I stay involved, I stay on the partnership, but I delegate the management structure to you and bring in the operations team for the day-to-day. I want to be reachable, not running it. Another pause. That's a real shift. Yes. The Singapore group will want to know your level of involvement. I'll talk to Tan directly, Nathan said. He knows me. He'll trust the structure if I explain it. And the German fund? Brenner wants performance, Nathan said. He doesn't care who's running the meetings as long as the numbers hold. They'll hold. David was quiet for a moment. Then, this is the right call, he said, quietly, like he wasn't sure if Nathan wanted to hear it or not. Don't get sentimental, Nathan said. I'm not, David said. But he was. The call with Tan Wei was a different conversation. Tan was a man who had built his own business from nothing in the late 90s, who had 2 daughters he talked about with the particular pride of a man for whom family and business were not separate categories, and who Nathan had always liked more than he'd let show in professional settings. I want to be transparent with you, Nathan said, about my involvement going forward. Tan listened. I have a son, Nathan said. He's 4 months old. His mother has a health situation that requires stability. I'm not stepping back from this partnership, but I am restructuring how I engage with it. Tan was quiet for a moment. David Park, Nathan said, is excellent. Better than I've given him credit for. He'll run the operational side. I'll be involved in strategic decisions, and I'll be available to you directly whenever you need me. But the day-to-day is going to be David's. There was a pause on the Singapore end. Nathan, Tan said. His voice had shifted slightly. Warmer, less the register of a business call, and more the register of one person speaking to another. My wife was ill for 2 years while I was building the second phase of our expansion. I ran it from hospital waiting rooms. A pause. I did not know at the time that this was a mistake. I understand it now. Another pause. David Park is a good man. I met him in September. I trust him. A beat. And I trust you more for making this call. Nathan exhaled slowly. Thank you. Tell me about your son, Tan said. So Nathan did, briefly, without sentimentality. 4 months old, rolling to his side, very opinionated about bath temperature. Tan laughed, a real laugh, not a professional one. Good, he said. This is good. We build the project and you build the family. Both are important, not one more than the other. No, Nathan said. Not one more than the other. He told Serena that evening. He drove to her apartment after a day that had not been uncomplicated. There had been 2 other calls, a revised legal memo, a heated discussion with Margaret Holden, who had opinions about the management restructure and who had expressed them at volume. And he was tired in a way he hadn't been in a while, the particular tiredness of a day that required you to hold your ground on something that mattered. Serena was nursing a cup of tea on her couch when he arrived. Lucas was asleep in the next room. She looked better than she had on Tuesday. More color, the particular quality of someone who had slept. He sat down across from her and told her what had happened. Not dramatically, just plainly. The call with David, the restructure, the conversation with Tan. She listened without interrupting, which was something Serena did better than almost anyone he had ever known. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You didn't walk away, she said. No, he said. You were right. That's not what was needed. You delegated. I restructured. Yes. She looked at him. How does it feel? He thought about it honestly. Uncomfortable, he said. I don't like not being the one with my hands on it. That's just true. He met her eyes. But I think I can live with uncomfortable. It's better than the alternative. She looked at her tea. What's the alternative? Going back to who I was, he said simply. She nodded slowly. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, Dr. Okafor called yesterday. The last round of blood work came back better. The medication levels are right. He's going to push my monitoring interval from 4 weeks to 6. Nathan felt something in his chest release slightly. That's good? That's good, she agreed. They sat in the quiet apartment with the sound of Lucas breathing through the baby monitor on the coffee table and the February dark outside the windows and the tea going cold between Serena's hands. I want to talk about something, Nathan said. She looked up. I know we said we weren't putting names on things, he said. I know you needed that, and I've been trying to respect it. He paused. I'm not pushing. I just want to say, I want to be here, not as a co-parent at arm's length. I want to be here in the way that actually means something. Serena looked at him steadily. What does that mean to you? It means being in your life, not just Lucas's. He said it carefully. It means trying again, differently, knowing what we did wrong. She was quiet for a long time. I'm scared, she said, not apologetically, just as information. I know. I'm not the same person I was when we were married. Neither am I. You say that. I know I say it, he said. I also know that 4 months of being different doesn't prove anything. I know you need time. I'm not asking for an answer tonight. He looked at her. I'm just asking you to know that I'm not going anywhere. Whatever shape this takes, I'm here. She looked at him for a long moment. The monitor breathed between them. Outside, a car passed on the street below, headlights crossing the ceiling briefly. Okay, she said, quietly. Just that. He drove home. He picked up Lucas from Vonda's care. She'd come for the evening. And he sat in the armchair in the nursery with his son awake against his chest, and the city dark outside, and he thought about what Serena had said about grand gestures versus showing up. He thought about the nature of proof. How in business, proof was the numbers, the close, the signed agreement. How in this, there was no equivalent. There was only the accumulation of ordinary days and whether you showed up for them or not. He was not good at ordinary days. He had spent his entire adult life treating them as scaffolding, necessary, but not the point, the space between significant moments. He was beginning to understand that for most people, ordinary days were not the scaffolding. They were the building. He was going to have to learn to be someone who built that way. Lucas was awake and looking at him with the focused, serious expression that had started to develop in month 3, and that had replaced the unfocused newborn gaze with something more deliberate. He was studying Nathan's face the way he studied everything now, with genuine attention, as if cataloging it. "I know," Nathan said. "I'm figuring it out." Lucas made a sound that was new, not quite a vocalization, more of an intentional something, a reaching toward communication that hadn't quite arrived yet. Nathan watched it happen. "Take your time," he said. "No rush." He held him until the baby's eyes went heavy. Set him down in the crib with the particular care of someone who had learned to do this over weeks of trial and adjustment. Stood over him for a moment in the dark room. Then he went to his desk. Not his office desk, but the small writing desk he kept in the study off the master bedroom where he did not conduct business. And he sat down and opened a notebook that was mostly blank and wrote for a long time. Not strategy, not plans. Just the shape of things as he understood them now, which was different from how he had understood them 6 months ago, which was different from how he had understood them during the marriage, which was different from how he had understood things when he had been a 25-year-old from the South Side who believed that the distance between where he was and where he intended to be could be closed by sufficient force of will. He had been right about the distance. He had been wrong about the closing. Some distances, he was learning, required a different kind of movement. Spring came slowly that year. March was still mostly winter, the lake running cold and gray, the city in the particular transition period where it hasn't yet committed to warmth. But things were shifting. Lucas turned 5 months, then 6. He laughed for the first time in early March, a real laugh, triggered by Marcus sneezing. And the sound of it reorganized something in the room that has never quite gone back to its previous arrangement. Serena's 6-week interval monitoring came back clean. Dr. Okafor extended it to 8 weeks. She started working more. The architecture firm in Wicker Park had referred her to 2 other clients, small businesses that needed identity work done thoughtfully. And Nathan watched her find her footing in Chicago again, carefully, on her own terms, in a way that he made sure not to help with too directly. He helped with Lucas. He helped when she asked. He did not help with the things she hadn't asked about, which was a daily discipline that he practiced imperfectly and was getting marginally better at. In late March, Catherine came back from Boston for a weekend. She took Lucas for an afternoon to give both of them time, which she offered without explaining what she thought the time was for, and which Nathan accepted without asking. He spent the afternoon at Serena's apartment. They sat at her kitchen table and talked for 3 hours. Real talking, the kind they had never quite managed during the marriage because there had always been something else pressing, always a reason to keep it surface. And some of what they said was hard, and some of it was funny, and some of it was the specific, painful clarity of 2 people acknowledging the versions of themselves that had contributed to something breaking. "I waited for you to notice things," Serena said at one point. "I kept thinking if I just waited long enough you would see what was happening, that I was lonely, that I needed more." She looked at her coffee. "But I never said it, and you never—" "Looked up long enough to see it," he finished. "Yes." "That's mine," he said. "That failure is mine. The not looking up. And the not saying it is mine." She looked at him. "I was so afraid of being a burden. My whole life I've been afraid of being too much for people, so I made myself smaller instead of asking for more." She paused. "And then I resented you for not seeing past the smaller version." Nathan said nothing. "Let it sit." "We were bad at being married," she said. "I think we both know that." "We were," he said. "I think we could be better at it." She looked at him. "Not now," he said quickly. I'm not asking now. I'm saying I believe it's possible. That's different." She looked at her coffee for a long moment. "I think it might be too," she said, quietly, like she was still deciding whether to say it even as it came out. The olive tree was a detail that had seemed inconsequential when they bought the house together 5 years ago. A property Nathan had purchased for investment and which Serena had turned into a home over his mild objections by doing small things that accumulated into something livable. The olive tree was in the small back garden, which Nathan had considered impractical and Serena had considered essential, and it had been there through the first good years of their marriage and through the years that weren't as good and through the end of it. He had kept the house. He wasn't entirely sure why. It wasn't sentiment exactly, or he hadn't admitted to sentiment. It was in his portfolio, managed by his property team, and he reviewed it in quarterly reports and did not go there. In early April, Serena asked him about it. Do you still have the Lincoln Park house? He was surprised by the question. Yes. I drove past it last week, she said. They were at the penthouse, Lucas doing floor time on his mat between them. On my way to a client meeting, she paused. The tree is blooming. He looked at her. There was something in her face that was careful and not quite guarded. Do you want to see it? He said. She was quiet for a moment. Yes, she said. I think I do. They went on a Saturday, the three of them, Nathan, Serena, Lucas, and the carrier against Nathan's chest. The property team had maintained it well. The house itself was empty and clean. They went through it without talking much, and Serena walked through the rooms with the expression of someone laying hands on something after a long time, and Nathan followed and gave her space and didn't fill the silence with things. In the back garden, the olive tree was doing what Serena had said. Small white blossoms, the particular smell of it in April, tentative and real. Serena stood in front of it for a long moment. Lucas was asleep in the carrier, face turned in, one fist against Nathan's chest. We had our worst fight right here, she said. December, 3 years ago, Nathan said. She looked at him, slightly surprised he remembered the month. You said you wanted to feel like my partner instead of my project, he said. I said I didn't know what that meant, which was a lie, by the way. I knew. I just didn't want to have to change anything. She was quiet. I'm sorry for that specific thing, he said. I've been sorry for it for a long time. I just didn't say it. She looked at the tree. We also had our best night right here, she said. The summer before. That terrible storm and the power went out, and we sat out here with the candles and the wine. And you made me talk about my mother, he said, which I didn't want to do. You talked for 3 hours, she said. I know. She looked at him. Something in her face was very open, which was not the usual condition of Serena Hartwell's face, and Nathan stayed still inside it. You're different, she said. Not for the first time. But this time it landed differently. Not with residual skepticism, but with something that sounded more like acknowledgement. You keep saying that, he said. You keep proving it, she said. It keeps surprising me. He looked at her. She looked at the tree. Lucas slept between them, warm and heavy and present. Serena, he said. His voice was quieter than usual. She turned to look at him. He had not planned this. He wanted to be clear about that for his own sake. This was not a strategy. He had not chosen the location for its symbolism or built toward this moment with the accumulation of calculated steps. He was standing in a garden in April with his son asleep on his chest, and the woman he had never stopped loving looking at him in the particular way she was looking at him, and what came out of him was simply what was true. I don't want to keep doing this at arm's length, he said. I know you need time. I know what I'm asking costs something, and I know I haven't earned it back entirely. And I know this is not a situation where I get to just want something and have it happen. He paused. But I want to ask anyway, because I think we should try, really try, the right way this time. She looked at him for a long moment. The tree moved slightly in the April wind. Ask me properly, she said. He looked at her. What? Ask me properly, she said again. Her voice was very quiet. If you're asking. He looked at her face, at the particular set of her expression, which wasn't romantic in the conventional sense, but was Serena, which was its own category. And he understood. He had no ring. He had not planned this. He was standing in a garden holding a sleeping baby, and he was going to do this anyway, because the alternative was not doing it, and not doing it was the version of himself he was trying to move away from. He looked at her steadily. Serena, he said, I would like to build this properly, with you. Knowing what we know now, knowing what we are and aren't, knowing it's going to be difficult and imperfect and require both of us to be different from who we've been. He didn't look away. I'm not asking because of Lucas. I'm not asking out of obligation or guilt or because it's the right thing to do. I'm asking because you are the person I want to do this with. All of it. The ordinary days. She looked at him. Her eyes were bright in a way that she would not, being Serena, acknowledge. The ordinary days, she repeated, especially those. She looked at him for a long time. The tree, Lucas, Nathan's face. Not yet, she said, and then, before he could absorb the shape of that, But I'm not saying no. She held his gaze. I'm saying not yet. I need more ordinary days first. I need to see that this. She gestured between them at the whole complicated thing they'd built over the past 5 months. I need to see that this holds, outside of crisis, when everything is just regular. Okay, he said. Is that okay? It's honest, he said. That's better than okay. She looked at the tree for another moment. Then she reached out and straightened the edge of Lucas's blanket in the carrier. A small, automatic gesture, the kind that has nothing to do with performance. And when her hand finished, she didn't quite pull it back, and Nathan felt the warmth of it at the edge of his arm. They stood there in the garden until Lucas woke up and had opinions about being hungry, which he communicated with clarity, and the moment folded back into the ordinary business of being two people managing a child and a complicated history and a future that was not yet determined but was, for the first time in a long time, pointing somewhere they both wanted to go. The ordinary days came. That was the thing neither of them had quite believed in, that after everything, after the hospital steps and the manila envelope and the New York hotel suite and the cardiac monitor and the garden in April, what would follow would simply be ordinary days. But they did. They accumulated without fanfare, one after another, each one asking nothing more than the willingness to show up for it. May arrived and Lucas discovered his feet, which he regarded with the philosophical intensity of someone encountering a profound mystery and could not be convinced to regard with anything less. June arrived, and he sat up on his own for the first time, briefly, for about 4 seconds, before toppling sideways onto the mat with an expression of complete indignation. Nathan was there for both of these things. He was there because he had restructured his professional life to make it possible to be there, and on the days when he nearly wasn't, when the Singapore call ran long or the legal review went into the evening, he felt the pull of absence, the way you feel the pull of a habit you're in the process of breaking. Real and uncomfortable and worth pushing against. Serena moved back into the Lincoln Park house in May, not with Nathan. He was clear about that, and she was clear, and they had a conversation about it that was adult and practical and only slightly awkward. He would take the penthouse. She would take the house. Lucas would travel between them with the flexibility of a child who was too young to understand arrangements and too young to be damaged by the particular version of this arrangement, which was two parents who were in each other's lives, genuinely, with increasing frequency and decreasing formality. The house suited her in a way the apartment never had. Nathan noticed the small changes when he came to drop off Lucas or pick him up, the way she had rearranged the living room, the plants she had put on the windowsill in the kitchen, the particular quality of a space that has been inhabited by someone who knows how to make a home rather than just occupy one. He had always known she was better at that than him. He had not, during the marriage, properly valued it. He told her that one morning in June, standing in the kitchen while she made coffee, and Lucas conducted important business with a set of soft blocks on the floor between them. "What made you think of it?" she said, not looking up from the coffee. "I was looking at the windowsill," he said. She looked at the windowsill. The plants were nothing dramatic, a small herb pot, something with trailing leaves that he didn't know the name of. "It's just plants," she said. "I know," he said. "That's what I mean." She looked at him. "That's a strange compliment." "I'm saying I notice things differently now," he said. "That's all." She handed him a cup of coffee. He took it. Their fingers didn't quite touch, but almost, in the way that almost had started to mean something without either of them announcing that it did. The ordinary days held. Doctor. Okafor extended Serena's monitoring interval to 12 weeks in July, which he described as encouraging without overstating it, because he was a man who understood that people with chronic conditions need honesty more than optimism. The thickening had not progressed. The medication was well tolerated. Her sleep had improved. Her stress levels, by her own self-report, and by the markers her blood work showed, were lower than at any point since the diagnosis. "What changed?" he asked at the July appointment, because he made a point of asking his patients that question when things improved. Serena thought about it. "My circumstances stabilized," she said. "The uncertainty went down." "What drove the uncertainty before?" She was quiet for a moment. "Doing too much alone," she said. Dr. Okafor nodded as if this were a clinical finding, which, in a way, it was. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said. What she was doing was working 3 days a week on design projects she had chosen carefully, with clients she liked, taking Lucas to the park on Wednesday mornings when the weather allowed, having dinner with Nathan 2 or 3 evenings a week, sometimes at the house, sometimes at the penthouse, sometimes with Catherine when she was in town, seeing Priscilla, who had become a genuine friend, the kind you don't plan for and can't quite account for, on alternate Saturdays. She was also, slowly and with the particular caution of someone who has been burned by moving too fast in one direction, letting Nathan back in. Not all the way. Not with the naive completeness of the early marriage, when she had loved him with the uncritical generosity of someone who had not yet learned that love and presence are not the same thing. But in the way that people who have been through something hard love each other when they're paying attention, with full knowledge of the risk and the willingness to carry it anyway. Nathan was paying attention. That was the central fact of the second half of that year, the thing that everything else organized around. He was paying attention to Serena, to Lucas, to the ordinary texture of his own daily life, in a way he had never paid attention to anything that wasn't a deal. He was not perfect at it. He had bad weeks. Weeks when the consortium hit a complication, and he reverted briefly to the version of himself that answered calls during dinner and checked his phone in the middle of conversations and lost himself inside the problem with the single-minded absorption that had always been both his greatest professional asset and his most reliable personal failure. On those weeks, Serena said so, directly, without drama, which he had learned was actually worse than drama because it offered him no emotional weather system to hide inside. "You're gone again," she said one evening in August. They were at the penthouse after dinner, Lucas asleep in the nursery. Nathan had checked his phone twice in 10 minutes. He put the phone face down on the table. "Singapore has a permitting issue." "I know," she said. "David called me to ask if you were okay." He looked at her. "David called you." He didn't know who else to call. She looked at him steadily. "He said you've been unreachable for 3 days except for work." Nathan was quiet. "It's one complication," she said. "David can handle it. You know he can." "I know he can," Nathan said. "That doesn't stop me from—" He stopped. "Old habits." "Yes," she said, not unkindly, just accurately. He picked up his phone, texted David. "Handle it. You have full authority. I'm offline until Monday." Then he set the phone down. Serena looked at him. "Better?" he said. "Ask me Monday," she said, but something in her face eased slightly. He called David on Monday. The permitting issue had been resolved. The timeline was intact. The thing that had seemed, in the grip of the old anxiety, like a crisis requiring his direct intervention, had turned out to be a normal business complication that a competent COO had handled without incident. "I'm starting to feel superfluous," Nathan said. "You're not superfluous," David said. "You're the relationship. You're Tan's trust and Brenner's confidence and the architecture of the whole thing. I'm just running the day-to-day." A pause. "That's actually the right structure, Nathan. It always was. You just needed to let it be." Nathan sat with that for a while after the call ended. He thought about the version of himself that had believed he needed to be the one with his hands on every piece of everything, that the value he provided was inseparable from his direct, constant involvement. He had believed that so completely that the idea of stepping back had felt, for most of his career, not just unappealing but actually dangerous, like removing a load-bearing wall. He had been wrong. The structure held. It held better in some ways because it was no longer dependent on one person's relentless presence. He thought about his marriage in those terms, about the way he had been so certain that what he was building was solid because he was always working on it, always moving, always generating. He had confused activity with construction. He had confused momentum with stability. The real things, the things that actually held, had never required that kind of constant agitation. They required consistency. Attention. The willingness to show up when you were not specifically needed. He understood that now in a way he had not understood before Lucas. He understood it because he had spent months doing something that produced no measurable output. Sitting in a dark nursery at 5 a.m, holding a sleeping child, talking to him about things that didn't matter to anyone except the man doing the talking. It had produced nothing, and it had changed everything. The foundation idea came from Serena. She brought it up in September when Lucas was 10 months old and pulling himself to standing on every available surface with the focused determination of someone who has identified a goal and intends to reach it regardless of the number of times the process requires returning to the floor. They were in the living room of the Lincoln Park house, which had become their de facto common ground, comfortable and neutral in the way that her space felt more settled than his, which he had stopped finding uncomfortable and started finding simply true. "I've been thinking about something," she said. She was watching Lucas use the coffee table as a scaffolding system. "Something I want to do." "Tell me." "When I was at Northwestern," she said, "in the cardiac unit in January, there was a woman in the room next to mine. She was there with her daughter. The daughter was 8, born with a congenital heart defect that had been managed with medication until it wasn't." She paused. "They were from downstate, a small town in southern Illinois. The mother had taken unpaid leave to be there. She'd driven 4 hours each way multiple times. She told me the drive was the hardest part, not the medical stuff, the drive. Because she couldn't afford to stay in Chicago and she couldn't afford to keep making the trip." Nathan said nothing, listening. "There are families like that everywhere," Serena said. "Families dealing with pediatric cardiac conditions who don't have resources, who have to make impossible choices between proximity to their sick child and keeping their life together." She looked at him. "I want to help with that." He sat with it. "What does that look like?" "A foundation," she said. "Housing assistance for families of pediatric cardiac patients at major hospitals, covering the costs that insurance doesn't. Temporary housing near the hospital, transportation, meals. The practical stuff that nobody thinks about until they're in it." She paused. "And eventually, funding for cardiac research. Pediatric specifically. Because what happened with Lucas," she stopped. "The risk that came with my pregnancy, the risk he could have been born with my condition," she shook her head. "There's not enough research. There's not enough support." Nathan looked at her. He thought about the woman in the room next to hers. He thought about Serena alone in that New York outpatient program, making every decision by herself because she didn't want to be a burden to anyone. He thought about what it would mean to build something that made that specific kind of alone less likely for other people. "I'll fund it," he said. "Nathan, not to own it," he said quickly. "I mean it as a partner. You run it. You design it. I provide the capital and the infrastructure." He paused. "Ask first." "I know." She looked at him. Her expression was unreadable for a moment. Then, "Yes," she said. "Okay." "Yes." They named it the Lucas Foundation, which Lucas himself would not appreciate for many years, and which Nathan privately thought was both presumptuous and exactly right. Serena built the operational structure with the same attention she brought to design, careful, purposeful, built around the actual needs of actual people rather than the idea of those people. She consulted with hospital social workers, with family advocates, with parents who had been through the specific experience she was trying to address. Nathan funded the first year's operating budget and then stepped back, which was increasingly what he was learning to do. Provide what was needed and then get out of the way so the thing could be what it was meant to be without the weight of his involvement shaping it. Catherine joined the board in November. Priscilla became the medical advisor. Dr. Okafor, who had by then developed a genuine appreciation for both Serena's character and her compliance with his treatment protocols, agreed to consult. By the end of the first year, the foundation had assisted 47 families across 6 hospitals in the Midwest. The number was not large, but the families were real, and the help was specific, and there was a mother from downstate Illinois who wrote a letter to Serena that November, which Serena read once and then put in a drawer because she could not read it twice without the specific emotion of it becoming something she couldn't work through quickly. She told Nathan about the letter, not what it said exactly, but what it had felt like to receive it. "That's why you do it," he said. "I know why I do it," she said. She looked at him, but hearing it said back, she stopped. "I spent so long doing things quietly, not wanting anyone to see, not wanting to be—" She paused. "Visible." She said the word with the particular weight of someone who has spent years calibrating exactly how much of themselves to put forward. "This is visible." "Yes," he said. "It is. It's uncomfortable." "You look like you're handling it." She looked at him for a moment. I am, she said, like she was still slightly surprised by that fact. Lucas walked for the first time just after his first birthday. Not the tentative, held breath first step that parenting books describe, one step and then sitting down, but three determined steps across the kitchen floor towards Serena. Arms out, expression of absolute conviction, before sitting down hard and looking up at both of them with the expression of someone who has just proved a point. Nathan was there. That is the fact that matters above all the other facts of that moment. He was there because he had reorganized his life to make it possible to be there, and the reorganization had cost him things. Some professional ground, some of the momentum that had defined him for 3 decades, some version of himself that had believed the deal was always the most important thing in the room. The cost had been real. The value had been larger. He proposed to Serena properly in December, not in the garden. The garden was too cold in December, and anyway Nathan had absorbed enough of Serena's sensibility over the past year to understand that performing the garden moment again would have turned it into theater rather than truth. He proposed on a Tuesday evening in the kitchen of the Lincoln Park house, which was where they were most often, in the ordinary way of their life, and which therefore seemed like the right place. He had a ring this time. He had bought it 6 weeks earlier and had not told anyone, not even Catherine, which was itself evidence of change, because he had spent his professional life unable to resist sharing strategic information with key stakeholders. Serena was cooking, something with pasta that had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and that she was salvaging with the particular focused problem-solving she applied to things she refused to give up on. Lucas was in the next room with the television on, not watching it, but pleased by its presence. The kitchen smelled like garlic and something burnt at the edges. Nathan came in from the living room and stood at the counter. Serena stirred the pot without looking up. "It's going to be fine," she said. "Don't say anything." "I wasn't going to say anything about the pasta." "Good." He reached into his jacket pocket, put the ring box on the counter beside her. She looked at it, went still, set down the wooden spoon, turned to look at him. He didn't go down on one knee. This was not a calculated choice. He had thought about it, and it had felt, for reasons he couldn't entirely articulate, like a performance of something rather than the thing itself. He stood in front of her in her kitchen with the ring box on the counter and looked at her directly. "I told you in April that I wanted to build this properly," he said. "I've been trying to show you since then what that looks like when I actually do it. I don't know if I've done it well enough. I know some days I haven't." He looked at her. "But I know that this specific life, with you and Lucas in this house, and the foundation and the ordinary days, I know that this is the thing. I've been certain about a lot of things in my life. This is a different kind of certainty. This is the kind that doesn't need a spreadsheet." She looked at the ring box, looked at him. "Serena," he said, "will you marry me again?" The kitchen was quiet except for the pot doing something on the stove that probably needed attention. She looked at him for a long time. Her face was doing the complicated thing it did when she was feeling more than she intended to show. "The pasta is burning," she said. "I know." "You're going to let it burn?" "Yes." She looked at him. Then she reached out and opened the ring box. Looked at the ring. Simple. Not what he would have chosen 5 years ago when bigger had seemed inherently better, but what he understood now. She picked it up. "Yes," she said, quiet and certain. "Yes." He put it on her finger. She turned back to the stove and pulled the pot off the burner. "It's salvageable," she said. "I told you." "You didn't tell me anything." "I had confidence," he said. She looked at her hand, the ring, then at him. "Don't make me regret this," she said. "I'll try not to," he said. "I'll probably still check my phone too much sometimes." "I know." "And I'll still want to solve things that aren't mine to solve." "I know that too. I'm going to be bad at this in specific ways that we can both predict in advance." "Nathan," she looked at him steadily, "I know who you are. I'm not marrying who you might become. I'm marrying who you've been this past year." She paused. "Don't go back to being someone else." "I won't," he said. "I mean it." She nodded, turned back to the pasta. He stood at the counter and watched her fix the thing she'd nearly ruined, and the house was warm, and Lucas made a sound in the next room that indicated the television had done something he found compelling, and Nathan Caldwell stood in the most ordinary moment he had ever inhabited, and felt, for the first time in his memory, that the ground beneath him was solid. They married the following spring in the garden of the Lincoln Park house. Not a large wedding. Nathan had the instinct for large and suppressed it, which Serena noticed and appreciated without saying so directly, which was its own evidence of how far they'd traveled. Catherine was there, and Gerald and Priscilla. David Park came with his wife. Dr. Okafor attended as something between guest and witness. Several of the families the foundation had helped were invited, which was Serena's idea and which Nathan had understood immediately was the right one. Lucas, 14 months old and fully ambulatory and extremely opinionated about everything, including the proceedings, spent most of the ceremony attempting to reach the olive tree, which he had identified as a climbing structure. Priscilla spent most of the ceremony preventing this. Lucas spent most of the reception being handed between people who had become attached to him over the course of a year, in which he had been present at many significant moments without understanding any of them. The vows were not the traditional version. They had written their own, which Nathan had initially resisted on the grounds that he was not a person who wrote vows, and which he had come around to over several weeks of drafting and discarding and starting again. His were shorter than hers. Serena's were more precise. She had always been better with language than him, had always been able to say the true thing directly without the professional hedging he had spent 30 years cultivating as a reflex. What she said in the garden under the olive tree in April, with Lucas making pointed escape attempts at the edge of her vision, was this: "I spent a long time being afraid of needing you. I thought needing someone was the same as losing yourself to them. I thought love and losing yourself were the same thing." She looked at him steadily. "I know now that's only true if the person you love doesn't see you, and you see me. You see me now in a way you didn't before, and I believe I've watched you this past year, and I believe you'll keep seeing me." She paused. "I'm going to try to let you. That's my promise. I'm going to try not to disappear inside myself when things get hard. I'm going to ask instead of waiting. I'm going to trust that you can hold what I give you." She looked at him. "Don't prove me wrong." He didn't try to match the poetry of it. He said what was true. "I was the kind of man who was very certain about a lot of things, and very wrong about most of the ones that mattered. You showed me that. Lucas showed me that. What I know now is that I want to be in the room. Actually in the room, not just present in it. I want to be someone you can count on to look up. I spent our first marriage looking down at the thing I was building and missing what was standing right in front of me." He looked at her. "I'm looking up. I intend to keep looking up." Catherine in the second row made a sound that was not quite crying and that she would have denied if pressed. The reception was in the back garden and ran long because the weather was good and no one wanted to be the first to leave. The families from the foundation brought children, which meant the garden was briefly louder and more chaotic than Nathan had planned for, which turned out to be fine. Lucas made friends with a 4-year-old named Maya, whose mother had been the first family the foundation had housed near Northwestern, and they spent 45 minutes in a state of mutual incomprehension that both of them apparently found highly satisfying. Nathan stood with a glass of wine at the edge of the garden in the early evening and watched his life, the specific texture and population of it, and thought about the version of himself who had stood outside Mercy General Hospital 18 months ago with a newborn baby in his arms and no framework for what came next. He had not known, in that moment, what the next 18 months would require. He would not have believed it if someone had told him that a baby could reorganize a man's entire inner landscape, that presence was a practice, not a personality trait, that the things worth building were slower and less legible than the ones he'd spent his career on, and that their value was harder to quantify and more durable. He had not known that you could have a second chance at something you'd already failed, and that the second chance would cost more than the first attempt, and be worth more too. David Park came and stood beside him. "How does it feel?" David said. Nathan looked at the garden. Serena was talking to Dr. Okafor. Catherine was holding Lucas, who was making a bid for freedom that she was handling with the patient expertise of a woman who had raised 3 children and was not intimidated by a 14-month-old. Maya's mother was laughing at something Priscilla had said. "Right," Nathan said. "It feels right." "Good," David said. He raised his glass. Nathan raised his. They didn't say anything else, which was the particular language of two people who have worked together long enough to mean things without stating them. The years that followed had the shape of things that grow properly, not in straight lines, not without difficulty, but with the particular accumulating solidity of something built on a real foundation. The international consortium delivered. The Singapore development opened 18 months behind schedule, because nothing on that scale opens on schedule. And when it did, it was what Nathan had designed it to be. Significant, lasting, his name attached to something that would stand for decades. He attended the opening with Serena and Lucas, who was 3 by then, and deeply uninterested in architecture and very interested in the hotel pool. Nathan stood in the building he had built and felt the satisfaction of it, genuine, real, and then went back to the hotel and sat on the edge of the pool with his son and felt something larger. He was not someone who had traded ambition for family. He was someone who had learned, late and expensively, that the two did not have to be opposites, that you could build a career and be present, that you could be ambitious and attentive, that the trick was not choosing between them, but understanding which one was structural and which one was finishing work, and getting the order right. The foundation grew. By the 3rd year, it was operating in 11 hospitals across 4 states, with a budget that had expanded beyond Nathan's initial funding because Serena had turned out to be a remarkable fundraiser, not because she was aggressive about it, but because she spoke about the foundation's work with the particular precision of someone who understood it from the inside, and people who heard her speak tended to write checks. The cardiac research component launched in year 4, funded jointly by the foundation and a grant from Northwestern Memorial. The research team's first published finding, on genetic markers in hypertrophic cardiomyopathy that might allow earlier intervention, appeared in a journal that Nathan read carefully and understood approximately 40% of, which he reported to Serena, who told him 40% was better than she'd expected. "Should I be offended by that?" he said. "No," she said. "It's actually a compliment. The other 60% requires a medical degree." "I could get a medical degree." She looked at him. "I'm kidding," he said. "I know," she said. "Mostly." Lucas turned 5, then 6, then 7, in the way that children do. Suddenly and also gradually, so that Nathan would look at him some mornings and not quite recognize the person who had replaced the infant, and other mornings would see the infant so clearly in the 7-year-old's face that it landed with a small shock of feeling. Lucas was, as far as Nathan could tell, primarily interested in 3 things: building things, taking things apart to understand how they worked, and arguing with full commitment about matters he had researched thoroughly in advance. He was not a quiet child. He was also not yet an easy child. He had opinions and expressed them, which Nathan found simultaneously exhausting and deeply satisfying because the opinions were often better than expected. He had, at age 7, cornered David Park at a family dinner and interrogated him for 25 minutes about why buildings were designed the way they were. David had held his own. Lucas had pushed back with counter-arguments. Nathan had watched this happen from across the room and felt something that was not quite pride and not quite recognition, but some combination of both. "He's going to be a problem," David said afterward. "I know," Nathan said, "in the best way. I know that too." Serena's cardiac condition remained stable, then improved, then stabilized at a level that Dr. Okafor described as better than he would have projected 5 years ago. She was not cured. The condition did not cure, was not going to cure. But it was managed. It was understood. She took her medication and attended her monitoring appointments and slept enough and kept her life at a pace her body could sustain, which was a negotiation she had learned to have with herself honestly rather than overriding. When she told Nathan she wanted to try for another pregnancy, she told him completely. Not the managed version, not the version edited for his comfort, but the real one, including what Dr. Okafor had said about the risks and what she herself understood about them, and what she had decided, sitting with all of that, she wanted. "Tell me everything," Nathan had said, and she did. And he listened without moving to resolve it or override it, and at the end he asked, "What do you need from me?" "To be here," she said. "The whole time. Every appointment, every hard week, every moment it gets scary. Here." "I'll be here," he said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm asking." The pregnancy was monitored with the intensity that the combination of Serena's history and Dr. Okafor's thoroughness demanded. There were hard weeks. There were weeks where the monitoring showed something that required additional tests, and the additional test produced 48 hours of waiting, and the waiting required Nathan to be present in the way he had promised to be. Not solving, not managing, just there. He was there. He was there imperfectly and with the ongoing daily effort of a man who was still, at his core, built toward action rather than stillness, but he was there. Grace was born in October, healthy, without the cardiac marker that had made the pregnancy high risk. She arrived with the particular aliveness of new humans, loud and complete and thoroughly herself from the first moment. Serena held her and looked at Nathan over the top of her daughter's head with an expression that had no name, but that Nathan would spend years afterward trying to find a word for. He did not find one. Some things are not improved by being named. Lucas met his sister in the hospital that afternoon. He had been told to be gentle. He stood beside the hospital bed and looked at Grace with the methodical assessment of someone conducting an evaluation, and then he looked at Nathan and then at Serena. "She's small," he said. "You were smaller," Serena said. "I don't remember that." "We have pictures." Lucas considered this. "Okay," he said. He reached out and touched Grace's hand very carefully, one finger, and she closed her fingers around it with the reflex grip of the newborn, and something moved across Lucas's face that he would not have had words for at 7, and that neither of his parents felt the need to explain. Nathan stood in the hospital room with his family and thought about standing outside Mercy General on a gray November morning with a baby he hadn't known existed and a manila envelope and no idea what came next. What came next had been this, which he could not have planned and would not have predicted, and which had required him to become someone he had not previously been. The cost of that becoming had been real. Some pride, some certainty, some version of professional identity he had built over 30 years, and which still existed but no longer defined everything. He had traded certainty for presence, and the trade had left him with something he had not known he was missing. He had spent his career building things that would stand, buildings and consortiums and financial structures, things you could point to and measure, things with names on them and footprints in cities and lines on balance sheets. He had believed for most of his life that those were the things worth building. He still believed they had value. He was not someone who had decided that what came before was worthless. The work was real. The building stood. The jobs existed. The foundation would not exist without the resources the work had generated, and the families the foundation had helped were real people whose lives were concretely different because of it. But he understood now what he had not understood then, that the things you build with your hands are external. They exist in the world, and the world does things to them, and eventually all external things end. And the things you build with your attention, with your presence, with the daily decision to see and be seen, those live differently. They live in people. In the way Lucas would carry some version of these years in him, invisibly, in the way he eventually learned to be in the world. In the way Grace would grow up with a father who was in the room, actually in the room, because he had learned the hard way what it cost not to be. In the way Serena had rebuilt something she had every reason not to rebuild, because she had watched long enough to believe it was different this time, and it was. You cannot point to that and put a number on it. There is no close, no signed agreement, no ribbon cutting. There's just a Tuesday morning in October in a hospital room with your daughter's hand around your finger and your son asking practical questions about feeding schedules, and your wife looking at you over the top of it all with an expression that means you are here, which is the only thing that was ever actually being asked of you. Nathan Caldwell had spent his life learning the wrong lesson from the right instinct. The instinct to build, to provide, to make things that last was sound. The lesson that the building required him to be absent from everything else, that presence was a cost rather than the point, was wrong. He had gotten there eventually, not easily, not without damage, not without the specific intervention of a baby handed to him on a hospital steps by a woman who had carried more than any person should carry alone, who had made choices he didn't agree with for reasons he came to understand. Not without grief for the time that had already passed and could not be recovered. But there, in the room, looking up, that was the whole of it, when he searched for the shape of what he had learned, not a philosophy or a framework, just a choice, made daily, to be present for the life that was actually happening, rather than the one he was always about to get to. Lucas asked him once, He was 8 by then, with the blunt directness of a child who had not yet learned to soften his questions. Dad, were you different before? When you were younger? Nathan thought about it honestly. Yes, he said. How? I was gone a lot, Nathan said, even when I was there. Lucas considered this. That doesn't make sense. I know, Nathan said. It took me a long time to figure that out, too. Lucas looked at him with the particular seriousness of a child receiving important information. Then he went back to whatever he was building, the way children do, accepting the truth of a thing and moving on without making it heavier than it is. Nathan sat and watched him build. Grace was asleep in the next room. Serena was working at the kitchen table, light from her laptop on her face, the particular quiet of someone absorbed in something they're good at. He sat in the middle of his ordinary life and did not check his phone. He had built many things over the course of his career. He would build more. There were still mornings when the deal was the most interesting thing in the room, when the numbers moved in him the way they always had, when the old certainty came back like a tide. But he knew something now he had not known before. He knew that the greatest thing he had ever built was not in Singapore or Chicago or Frankfurt. It was not on a balance sheet or a skyline. It was right here, imperfect and ongoing and requiring his attention every day. And that was something he intended, for the rest of his life, to give it.